missing two members, two members and a student member, and Ellen. Yeah, so we'll give it a couple more minutes.
Evan, did I see that you were all-star for cross country?
Yes, yeah.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
Thank you.
Very happy for you.
My parents were too. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. I saw your name on there.
So should we embarrass you after the student report, or we just let it go through and...
I don't think I need to be embarrassed.
Okay, I won't do it tonight. Deal.
Perfect.
Hi, Caroline. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Tammy, I like the headphones.
Thank you. Channeling my inner Madonna. I think only people of a certain age will understand that.
Alas, yes.
I thought we all had an inner Madonna.
There we go, Brian. We'll see.
I don't know if Chris has inner Madonna.
Chris, what?
You have an inner Madonna?
Inner Madonna? Like...
No.
So we are waiting for Ellen and...
Ellen was on the phone with Stacy trying to iron some stuff out for the CARES grant.
So we can start without her, because I don't think I mean, she's always needed, but I don't think she's technically needed until a little bit further into the agenda.
If I turn my camera on and off, it's just because I'm shoving dinner into my mouth.
And if I turn the camera on and off, it's just because I can't sit for 4 hours anymore. It's just not possible.
Intent.
No hint intended by that. So let me just double check. I just reached out to Michelle. We'll give her another few moments. WinCam, if you can hear me, are you ready to go live when we're ready? Okay, so I've just been informed that Michelle is actually in the waiting room because her panelist ID wasn't working. So we will go live, and the first thing we'll do is let her in. Karen, if you can go ahead and do that as soon as we go live. So I'm going to start the webinar, and WinCam, we are ready to go live when you're ready.
We're live on WinCam, Brian.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Nixon. And I just want to see that Ms. Bergstrom is elevated to a panelist.
I'm looking.
Okay.
Oh, there. Okay.
Thank you very much. Once we make sure she has audio and everything, we can then proceed forward.
Just want to remind you to call us to order. We're live on WinCam, but we're just waiting for a call to order.
Correct. Ms. Bergstrom, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Excellent. And I think we have everyone here, so I will indeed call us to order. We'll call to order the regular school committee meeting of December 15th, 2020, being held remotely due to the COVID pandemic. I'm going to go over the agenda. We will start with student report. We're lucky to have 2 students here tonight. Move on to public comment. We have an action item, a vote to accept a WIFI grant. We'll move on to reports and discussion items. We have a COVID-19 district update. We have select board anti-racism initiative. We have a revision of some job descriptions. We have a number of action items, vote to approve superintendent's goals 2020-2021, if we're ready to approve them tonight. Some things we put on as action items in case we're ready for it. A vote to approve transportation agreements, again, same deal. A vote to approve minutes. We have the chair report, superintendent report, future agenda items, and future meeting dates. So that's just sort of a quick rundown of tonight's meeting. And as usual, we are thrilled to have Evan and Caroline come take time out of their busy schedules to give us a report on what's happening at the high school and around town. So welcome. I would welcome you to give us sort of an update on what you're seeing and how things are going.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for having us again. So at the high school this week, there's the AA cohort has class this week and next week. The BB cohort just has class this week and none next week. And winter sports tryouts are happening right now. So we're very excited to have those and that it's possible to even have those. So we're very grateful. And then winter break is coming up. We're all very excited, which is next week. And then also for seniors, a lot of the early decisions for colleges are coming out this week. So it's a big week for seniors. Very stressful, lots of emails, lots of posts, but very exciting at the same time.
Thank you.
We also have a few different things going on at the high school at the moment. Connecting Commit has adapted its annual fundraiser. We usually do candy cane grams where we deliver candy canes to the students. Our COVID safe version of that includes using stickers and e-cards and non-contact forms of doing that to keep the holiday spirit alive and to bring a little bit of joy even in the pandemic. And another exciting update is that the Winchester High School chapter of the National Honor Society has recently accepted its new members. So a large group of juniors and some seniors have all been inducted have all been notified that they've been accepted and will be inducted soon. So that's exciting for a lot of upperclassmen.
Thank you both. That's very exciting. Thank you very much for your report. Before I go around to ask if there are any questions, as you're both probably aware, there is a potential snowstorm coming on Thursday, and we've been informed that we may have a remote day on Thursday. What are your thoughts about that as students, and what's the sort of the scuttlebutt amongst students?
I know that I've heard from my friends because we in the AA cohort haven't had a remote day yet, but BB had a remote day on their first day of school when it was delayed. They said that it was a bit rough to be home on those 50-minute Zooms because it's longer than the usual class, and they thought it was hard. But so there's a little bit of sadness, obviously, about not having a snow day, that you still have to go to school. But I think when people think about the fact of having one day of school, for example, a week instead of the usual 5, I think most people are okay with getting to see their teachers and classmates, even if it is just stuck at home.
Thanks. I was curious.
Yeah, I think people I know are definitely want to go to school if they can. I know, but we want to keep everyone safe. But snow days are hard, and I know that they definitely had a lot of difficulty staying on a computer for a full school day. I think that's really hard, even though Evan and I haven't had to experience that, luckily.
Thank you. I was just curious, from the students on the ground, what their thoughts were. Any questions or comments from the committee?
I have one.
Mr. Nixon.
So to Caroline and Evan, it's not an action item on the agenda tonight, but under the superintendent's COVID-19 report, we may be talking at least somewhat about winter athletics. And as you're probably aware, there's been some information shared that came out from the Middlesex League superintendents and athletic directors around some initial guidelines and restrictions to keep everybody safe. Some of that we've discussed at a very high level, this committee has, some of it we haven't, and we may get into some of that tonight. This is a very unique year because school committees typically don't get into the weeds on athletics, but of course this is not a typical year. I'd love to know from the two of you now, and as always, as Brian says, you're welcome to stick around for conversations, but what scuttlebutt are you hearing from student athletes with respect to the guidelines or rules as they apply right now for the winter season, including contests? Do you feel like Is there understanding and support for that? Is there concern for that? Is there any sort of student feedback around winter athletics you feel would be helpful for the school committee to hear tonight?
I know that some people are like obviously a little bit upset with all the rule changes just because they're saying the game's not the same, it's not the same. But I think overall they're just grateful to be playing. So I think it's like frustration, but also like it is what it is. Like at least we get to still play.
I would say the same. I've heard some complaints about changes in like spectatorship, but the vast majority of people have definitely said at least we get to have our sports, and everybody's very excited that we get to have the season, no matter what that does look like. I also know that there were some people, for example, for indoor track, they were hoping, I don't know at what level this was discussed or if there was any merit to it, but people thought that there was a debate between canceling track altogether or moving into fall 2 that season. So I know that a lot of people were very relieved that it was moved to fall 2, even if that is just temporary. So I think people can be upset at times about the regulations, but everybody would just like to be out there doing the sports that they want to be doing.
So I appreciate that. And our athletic director, Mark Aria, of course, always has numbers handy. He's not with us tonight, but I'm wondering, do you have a sense anecdotally, do students find these rules, is it sort of a disincentive to even try out? I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm hoping that our student athletes still feel encouraged to try out for teams and to compete and not sort of throw in the towel. Do you have any indication about that?
From my experience, I think I've seen an increase actually in students. I don't know whether that would be because of the season or not, but I know that we have, for example, our Nordic ski team is involving a bunch of new skiers, including upperclassmen. And in the fall, our cross-country team actually had an exceptionally large number of freshmen, which was very exciting for us because normally, we go to the 8th graders at McCall and we talk to them and get them to join the team. And we didn't get to do that this year. There was none of that. So we were really excited that there were a large number of freshmen doing that. And I think that freshmen are also going out for winter sports in large numbers.
Thank you.
That may just be in a simple matter of athletics can be like other extracurricular activities can be such a welcome outlet for students, and especially right now, especially winter where we're all really encouraged to be indoors and not outdoors. An outlet like winter sports just could be huge. I'm really encouraged to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Other questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you both. This is actually really helpful as always. And as Mr. Nixon alluded to, you as always are welcome to stay around if you want to hear it and be part of anything that we're doing for the rest of the evening. But also it's as always a school night. So make sure you get to bed early. Thank you very much. Just teasing there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we will move on to public comment. I'd like to remind members of the public that public comment is an opportunity for you to speak about topics under the purview of the school committee. It's not a dialogue, nor are we required to respond to any questions or comments you make. However, we do welcome them and we do listen to them. We'll be doing public comment via the raise hand on the Zoom application. We will try to limit public comment to 20 minutes in total and 3 minutes per speaker. And of course, you're always welcome to put your hand down if someone else makes a comment that you feel encapsulates something that you wanted to say. Usually I ask people to lower their hands before we start, but seeing no hands raised yet, I will now open public comment and welcome any raised hands to be able to come speak at the table. Seeing no raised hands.
I don't see any either, Brian.
Thank you very much. I will close public comment and move on to the next item on the agenda, which is an action item, a vote to accept a WIFI grant. I'd like to welcome Ms. Connolly to the table if she is in the attendees list. And while she is being invited to the table, I'd like to just give a quick overview that she's Ms. Connolly is the executive director of WIFI, and she's here tonight to ask for committee approval of a grant. And I will not take away her thunder by telling you about the grant. I'll let her tell her about herself. So Ms. Connolly, welcome tonight, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for not taking away the thunder. I'm not sure how dramatic this is, but it is an interesting grant. So Betty Beauchamp reached out to me a month or so ago talking about a program that is being offered at Plymouth Plantation, a virtual program called People of the Dawn. And so Plymouth Plantation is reimagining what their educational experience looks like and doing, I think, a much better job and a stronger job of recognizing the impact of colonization on Indigenous people and talking more about the culture of Indigenous people back in the 17th century and how it continues into present day America. So Betty had been a third grade teacher before she became one of your district-wide educational coaches. So she was pretty excited to bring this program to the entire third grade. And she has worked with all of the teachers and done an amazing job scheduling it. So it will be a virtual field trip that all of the third grade students will take part in. It will probably be, I believe, an hour-long experience from what it looks like Plymouth Plantation describes it as. So as with everything else in COVID, you know, it's a little unusual for WIFI to support something that is in essence a field trip. That's not something that WIFI would normally do. But in this case, we felt like the program supported so strongly the district goals around curriculum. And it was more of we didn't view it as much of a field trip, and we're certainly not paying for buses. And practically, it would be nearly impossible for the third grade teachers to reach out to their students who are both remote and to parents to ask for funding for it. Many of our parent organizations are not fundraising as strongly this year and don't have as much money. And we didn't want to open up a situation where we would have 2 or 3 parent organizations offering to pay for this, but then the other one's not. It just seemed that, you know, for all intent and purposes, this would be the right year to make a little bit of an exception. So that's what we are doing. And we are offering to make a gift to the school department of $3,125 to support People of the Dawn.
Thank you very much, Ms. Connolly. We're very appreciative. And I would point out, I think it even is in the information you provided us that Plymouth Plantation is no longer Plymouth Plantation. It is now Plymouth, I don't want to mispronounce it, but it's not Plymouth Plantation. If somebody knows how to pronounce it properly, Patuxet, I believe, but I could be mistaken.
And that's why I didn't say it, because I didn't want to be mistaken too, but I believe you're correct. That is how I would pronounce it.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from the committee?
Well, that's easy. I tell you what, I'll give you an exciting update too. I was speaking today to the folks at Vincent Owen, and I told them that they could consider this like dessert at the meeting. WIFI had been threatening to do a virtual trivia bee, and having watched another Education Foundation's virtual bee, I decided that perhaps there was a different way to approach this. And so with our very creative board members, we've come up with a proposal for a bee in a bag because we want you to stay safe. So we will be delivering bags of information. So the questions for children, questions for adults, plus some swag, plus a great bag recognizing our sponsors, directly to the doors of folks who decide to sign up for the bee. Instead of playing as a team, it will be $100 for a bee bag to your home, with the idea being it's a good thing to do with your kids, or if individual families want to reach out to friends and do a Zoom challenge. We will have some prizes and we will have some ways to recognize people. We will be doing it in February, the first Wednesday in February. We'll be dropping off the bee bag. So that's a different way to imagine a community tradition, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. So So this year's school committee, you don't have to worry about being shown up by the select board or anybody else. You can all play bee in the bag all by yourselves.
It's always Ms. Harrison who shows us off, so we have no chance of beating her. So for style, put it that way. Thank you. That sounds like an amazing opportunity, and thank you for sharing that tonight, because I think that a lot of viewers and members will definitely want to participate.
Right,
Ms. Marchant.
I'm happy to make a motion if you're ready.
Seeing no questions or comments, I would be delighted.
I move to approve with gratitude the grant of $3,125 to support a virtual program for the district's entire third grade as presented.
Second.
A roll call vote required. Ms. Bolognese,
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom,
Aye.
Ms. Marchant,
Aye.
Mr. Nixon.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Vote is unanimous. Ms. Connolly, thank you very, very much for everything you do. This is really sort of the icing on the cake of all the things you do. So I think we've now used that analogy twice tonight, so that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I hope you have an excellent meeting, and I hope that all of you who have students still in the school remember that all of January is Author Fest, starting the Wednesday we come back from winter break. So put that on your calendars.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I, of course, welcome you to stay for the rest of our meeting. Ms. Bolognese, if you would help her back into the attendees list. And with that, I will move on to the next agenda item. I like starting out with WIFI. I think we should start out with WIFI at every meeting. It makes it a much nicer meeting. We move on to report and discussions items, and we will be starting that with an update on COVID-19 district response. And with that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent, Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans.
Good evening. Happy to share some information, which in this is kind of a broad topic, COVID-19 response. So many aspects of our operations connect to this directly or indirectly. As we've had to adjust, as you heard from WIFI, our operations in relation to instruction, co-curricular, food service, transportation, athletics, you name it. It's been a challenging year. So I sent you a brief summary this afternoon of my remarks, and if you haven't had a chance to read them, don't worry about it. I just wanted you to have it for your reference. I plan to talk about tonight testing and vaccines, a little bit of information on positivity trends, a little bit of information on athletics, and then more for questions, to gather questions in relation to our planning for movement to more in-person learning. So I'd like to start with some information on testing and vaccines. We have continued to move forward with the Binox Now rapid testing pilot. It has been very technically challenging with a lot of steps, but I want to thank Jen Markham, who's our nurse leader. She's been working with the nurses and with public health to check off the boxes so that we can get access to some of these rapid tests. In the coming weeks, we'd like to begin with using them for symptomatic adults. These tests are restricted to use with symptomatic individuals. Fortunately, within our schools, we have few symptomatic individuals. We don't want people to come to school if they have symptoms, and they have been extraordinarily good about staying at home if they have symptoms. But this is a pretty structured pilot, and so we have to abide by the regulations that come with it. So those rapid tests should be available starting with adults, and then perhaps we'll move to high school and middle school students and see how that works before we expand to the elementary schools in the coming weeks. So further information will be shared as we receive it. And if you want to read more about it, I've provided a link to the DESC website that outlines the provisions. I'll stop there and take any questions anyone might have about the rapid testing first.
Dr. Evans, totally up to you. Do you want to go over each section maybe? And because I know you have a whole section on testing and vaccine, only because the questions might tie into that, and then trying to be efficient with your time.
Sure, absolutely, can do that.
Thank you.
So the next thing I'd like to express is my gratitude, particularly for the public health department Jen Murphy and the nurse who works for the public health department and our nurses who've been working together to conduct contact tracing. They have been extraordinarily effective in that, as you have probably seen from the information that I've shared with you, the majority of the students who've become positive have not been in school while infectious because they've already been on quarantine. Often there is family transmission or community transmission, and the careful contact tracing that our public health team has conducted has allowed us to quickly identify and isolate and quarantine those who need to stay at home and not be in school. And so I think that process has been incredibly effective. We've also really benefited from the cohorting model where some of our students have become ill or have been tested during the time when their cohort is not physically present, and that has really helped as well. We have a number of full remote students now who are also testing positive, but they don't have a chance to infect anyone since they're not in school at all. So I would like to compliment and thank the public health department. They are just extraordinary, working every single night in both days on the weekend since February, tirelessly and very thoroughly. This is not the case in every community. Some communities have been so overwhelmed they've just stopped even doing contact tracing, which really has an effect on schools because then people are coming who have mild symptoms or asymptomatic, and then they're at school. And so that has not generally been the case for Winchester. We were also grateful for the town, for the select board and the town manager who have worked to contract with an outside testing agency to do several free tests, COVID-19 tests for employees or town residents. And a couple of those are coming up. I sent them out to our full staff, but they're available on the town manager's website if anyone wants to go and sign up. I think that actually the testing window is closing in about half an hour. So if you're home watching and you still want to test, you might want to jump on and make sure you grab one of those open slots on one of the open days.
I believe the slots are all full.
For all days testing or just the one this week?
I believe for both days. Yeah.
Both days. Good.
I agree. Well, they're both full.
Good to know. So that's great. I'm grateful that people are taking the time to test so that we can find anyone who might be positive before they're in school. So we're told that vaccines will be available for public educators in sort of the second round after the kind of first responders, medical personnel, and folks who are significantly at risk, folks in care facilities and so forth. Sometime between February and April. This gives us a lot of hope. We see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. Some parents have been emailing me saying, does this mean we'll be able to open in February? The reality is that because of the time in between the two immunizations that you have to get, the two vaccine iterations that you have to have, it really will be likely the end of April at least before everybody's vaccinated. And so there may be an impact in the last couple of months of the school year that lets us feel that there's a little more safety. But in general, we are seeing people in our community, including children and employees who have been made very ill by becoming COVID positive, by contracting this illness. And so anything we can do to prevent more people from becoming so ill, including some folks who've been hospitalized, is really important to us. So we are grateful to see the vaccines rolling out, but our educators will not be involved in this for several months, and I have not heard any plans for how we're going to roll it out yet, nor has public health. So testing and vaccines, anyone has any questions about before I move into kind of positivity trends?
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Questions, comments? Ms. Bolognese?
I just had a quick question on the rapid Phoenix Now test. You had just said, I was wondering, where will the tests take place? Where are they taking place?
So all of our nurses will be trained in how to perform the tests. Obviously, like any kind of test you would have, the nurses would be in full PPE. They'd take all appropriate precautions. It's a nasal swab test, so the nurses have to get close to the person. And it's a rapid test in that the swab is taken, it's put into, there's a solution that it's put into, and then 15 minutes later, you get an indication. But it's only designed to tell you with, a fair amount of accuracy whether there's a chance that you are COVID-19 positive. You still have to go and get the confirmation test. And so it's not designed to replace any of the tests, but merely to give people notice earlier than they would have if they went and had a more traditional test. And so they'll be given in nurse's office. Right now, we're not as comfortable with the process in use with young children because it could be somewhat frightening for them, and we are not that comfortable giving tests like that without parents present. With adults, see how it works, get comfort level with it, then perhaps try it with older students who can manage it better, and then we'll assess, whether and when we'll bring it down into the elementary level. We don't see district-wide that many people who are showing symptoms at school, so we'll have to collect some data about how many people might fear that they have COVID-like symptoms and want to be tested. For the most part, anyone who's ill at all or has a fever, we would like them to stay home. And so they shouldn't be in school to be tested unless they become ill during the day at school.
And I think in the memo it said beginning with adults, and this is just limited to staff, or like the school staff?
Yes, right now we're going to start with staff and see how the procedure goes. There are lots of reporting requirements associated with this for sharing information for anyone who's tested, that we just want to make sure that we have all the procedures down. And it's a lot easier if you do it with adults who are there to give their permission. What we don't want to do is, if we only get a small number of tests and we don't find them that useful, we don't want to collect a lot of permission slips from every student and submit lots of personal information unless we really need to use the tests. So we're filling them out as much as the state is filling us out to see whether this is something that will work for school districts.
Great. And about how many tests are there?
I think we're going to get about 40 or 50 tests per school. So not a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Ms. Bergstrom, I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, I just had a quick question, Dr. Evans, because you said that the procedures that we're using right now in the schools are the symptom checker and the encouraging people to stay home when they're sick, you feel is contributing to keeping COVID out of our schools. Do you feel in any way that as testing becomes harder to get and more scarce as numbers seem to rise, you have any concerns about this actually encouraging people with symptoms to come into the building knowing they could get tested if they have symptoms?
So that was set up. I think that's an excellent question. The nurses raised the same concern that our nurses are already stretched very thin. For example, our nurses call every student absent to be sure that they don't have COVID symptoms, that their absence is not caused by a COVID related issue. They're people who are home on quarantine. They're contact tracing during the day when there's a case that comes up. So our nurses are doing a lot of sort of public health work and follow through work that they wouldn't normally be doing. The one pattern that we've noticed is that in a typical school year, many students would come with typical childhood illnesses. They come with, runny noses, or they might get a stomach upset. And on a typical day, there are only a handful, fewer than 10 students district-wide who are dismissed for illness during COVID. And I think that parents and community members are taking this seriously. So not making the tests available for students yet will allow us to see how well they work and whether all of the bureaucracy related to them is worth the effort. And then we might start with the older students to see if we start to see students coming in who are symptomatic. It's really a little bit problematic to us that this test can only be used for people who are symptomatic rather than people who are concerned that they were exposed to someone. And that's a difference, right? You have to be showing symptoms to be eligible to use this test. And we do want to strongly discourage anyone who's ill from coming into the building. And so for that reason, we've had a lot of absences. A lot of staff members have been absent because they've had illness that might be COVID, but turns out almost always to be not COVID. We have not seen a similar number of absences among students. Student attendance is actually quite high, and so for the most part. So I think it's a valid question of concern, which is why we're kind of treading cautiously into the use of this test. And then we'll, if we started to see a lot of people presenting with illness, then I think we would discontinue the use of the test, and we would run out of tests pretty quickly because we're only getting a handful at each school at this point. The other thing that I have seen is that home testing kits are going to be available in drugstores pretty soon. So for about $30. So I think many community members who might be concerned about having been exposed or might have mild symptoms might start to have the availability of the rapid test that they can do themselves in their own homes. So that might help if people have difficulty accessing testing sites.
Do we have any leeway to set up basically a district testing site to sort of mitigate for the problem that you were speaking of with the educational staff who stays home because they have the sniffles but may in fact be negative? Would there be a way for them to come in someplace in the district and do the rapid test and find out sooner to be able to keep educators in classrooms?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'll throw that back to the nursing team and see if they think that we could work something like that out. The conditions under which we're supposed to use these tests are very prescribed. And so there are, and again, like you can read it, there are some, there's a lot of data collection and a lot of training that we have to certify first. So we had to go to our physician and get an order for it and so forth. So it was very complicated to even get this far in the process. But I think your suggestion about using it for symptomatic individuals who have been in the building but might want to have a quick test, it could be something we could coordinate with public health as well. So let me circle back. That's a good suggestion.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Additional questions?
Other questions? Okay. Moving on
wait, Mr. Nixon. My apologies, Mr. Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Dr. Evans, if I was hearing your presentation correctly, that maybe with the news that the vaccine is shipping, you're getting more and more questions and interest in when we can get students, particularly elementary students, back into school more often, more frequently. And you mentioned that that's not likely to happen before, I think you said February or March. I would just throw out there for the committee that if every single Winchester student got the vaccine, we would have between 400 and 500 students with no protection against COVID-19 because there is no vaccine that's 100% effective. So 90% efficacy is amazing. It's incredibly high, but it's not 100. And so in my mind, vaccination rates are really important. And I've long been concerned as COVID has become as politicized as it is, will we see a greater vaccination rate with the COVID vaccine than we would see for the common flu? Would we see less? So among the population, and I don't know if this includes kids, but generally across Massachusetts, my understanding is between 60 and 63% of people in Massachusetts get the influenza vaccine. And if that's as high as we go with COVID, I'm really concerned because that's a tremendous number of people who would benefit from a vaccine who aren't getting it. And I would remind the committee that someone who gets the vaccine who is in that 10% or more, depending upon whether it's a Pfizer or Moderna or what comes out, those people could still get sick and they could be asymptomatic and they could spread it and send somebody into the hospital. So as encouraged as I am that a vaccine is shipping and others will ship soon, it to me is no great panacea. I still remain concerned about opening up to a normal, school environment anytime. I'd love to do it tomorrow if we could, but I see the need for vaccination with the national guidance. So it's, nursing homes, it's healthcare providers, and eventually we get to teachers, which is terrific. And at some point we get to students. But when we talk about family spread in households, so it's not just students, it's moms and it's dads, right? And it's siblings. This is going to take a long time. So I'd like to hear what Dr. Evans sort of thinks about that. I didn't mean to go on and on, but to the extent that there's increasing pressure on you, Dr. Evans, to get kids back into school in greater numbers and more quickly, I hope you're having conversations with our COVID planning team and our Board of Public Health around vaccination rates. At some point, I think we as a community, we as a state, at least because up to this point, there's kind of been a vacuum of sort of directives at the national level. But it seems to me an important question is going to be, what sort of vaccination rates are communities going to have to hit in order to reopen different aspects of life? And schools is just at the top of that list. So I'd like to know what Dr. Evans thinks about that, or other committee members if they're so inclined.
Sure. Well, I can weigh in with my thoughts on it. I have thought a lot about this. I live with I have 3 children, and 2 of them are in situations exposed to COVID frequently. And so we're always very attuned to spread in our home and in the community. And we talk frequently about when my daughter is going to, as a healthcare provider, is going to get her vaccination. She just got word today it's going to happen in the next couple weeks, which is great. Our teachers are very anxious to get it as well. And Lori Kirby can speak to the pressures that school districts feel because we have large numbers of employees who have significant medical at-risk conditions that make them medically ineligible to teach in person. One of the things I'm hopeful is that those folks would be in the first group to receive vaccines and feel more comfortable and get medical clearance to teach in person. One of the biggest barriers to fully reopening is not just the public perception that students may become ill or that teachers may become ill, but the very real sort of staffing challenges we face when we have so many staff members who can only work from home. So my hope is that there'll be sufficient vaccines to begin to protect some of those folks. It is concerning to me that some of our families who have chosen the full remote route are now infected as families with children who are infected. And they chose that option because they often have someone in their home who is extremely at risk, or an elderly grandparent or a loved one. And so despite our best efforts, we seem to see that there is community spread happening. And I'm hoping that the vaccine will help some of those folks as well. The single biggest, and I'm going to talk next about sort of positivity trends and kind of lessons learned. The biggest single benefit to our cohorting of our students and keeping the numbers low is that the number of close contacts is extraordinarily low in most cases in the school, because teachers and students are following the rules and staying at least 6 feet apart. They're wearing masks. And my concern is that even with a large number of folks being vaccinated, that it'd be difficult for us to move closer than 6 feet, because I still think that a single positive person could take down an entire class or several teachers, depending on the grade level. And we have not seen that, and that's been extremely gratifying. If you listen to the national experts in the CDC and various organizations, they say things will start to feel more normal in the summer and early fall, but that probably for the full 2021-2022 school year, we will be masking and social distancing and hand washing and continuing to do our disinfection and following our procedures. We may be able to come back fully in person in the fall. That's what I'm budgeting for. That's what I'm planning for. And it depends on the expert advice we're getting from medical professionals. We have a number of medical professionals who are helping to support our COVID-19 district planning and implementation group. We have a large number of scientists and medical professionals in our community and in our state. And so we'll continue to listen and learn from them. I get as many emails from concerned families who want me to fully close and be all remote as I do who want me to bring students back in person. And so I think that probably all of you as school committee members hear from both groups. And there is no easy answer. We are taking this day by day, hour by hour at this point. And we are trying to consider all options, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute, around planning for more in-person learning. So we're not counting on the vaccines to be a magic bullet and to get everybody back in person. But we are hopeful that they will ease some of the anxiety, particularly for those people who are very high risk. I don't know if that is helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. I would just add that the emergency approval of the current vaccine does not include individuals under the age of 16 yet. So our students will, the vast majority of our students would not be able to partake of the vaccine. And furthermore, most families in town, be they students or the adults in them, would likely be in sort of the phase 4 of the vaccination process, the final phase. So while we might have our teachers and school staff vaccinated by April, it's likely that we'll be continuing our families through to, I mean, the hope is that by September, but that's a hope. So just would add that. And hopefully by the time students time comes to get vaccinated, it will also be approved for under 16. So it's worth pointing out.
Sure. I'd like to move into sort of positivity trends and
yes,
caution.
Please.
So the trends that we're seeing, as I said, we've had very limited school spread. We haven't had zero school spread. We've had, a couple of instances where a student sitting next to someone has transmitted in an elementary classroom. None that we know of at middle school or high school. We've had some adults who work for us who've worked too closely and haven't been able to not transmit. So they've transmitted to each other for a variety of circumstances and because they've been too close unmasked. And so, but the in-school spread has been quite limited. And when I send my communications every day, after I speak with the public health department, verify that they've completed all the contact tracing and gained a little bit of information that's appropriate for me to know, we are looking at trends that show that it's family spread, that it's one adult in the family or one likely older child in the family often becomes positive and then a whole family gets positive. And so you'll often see a high school student and then a few days later we'll have an elementary or middle school student who's a sibling. Obviously, when I tell that information to the public via what I share with parents, I'm not going to identify who those folks are, but that's the trend we're seeing. We can usually identify the initial source as somebody in the family who contracted it, often from, and I don't want to pick on youth sports or outside activities, a non-school social activity, I will say, like a sport that a younger child is playing on a team or a high school student is playing in an elite team. And then at the high school level, more at the high school level, some socializing without masks that is spread from student to student outside of school. We know it's not school spread because they're not in classes together necessarily. And they can identify who they were with, and a close contact is identified, and then that close contact later becomes positive. So we're able to trace fairly accurately most of the time the sources of the infection. We also have staff members who are infected in their own communities or their own homes, and a fairly significant number of staff members who need to quarantine because they're a close contact to someone, even if they're not positive themselves. So people need to remember that it's the impact on our district is more than the numbers that we see on the COVID-19 dashboard that our public health department completes on a daily basis at about 4 o'clock. So what would tip us over to a point where we would need to close? One of the things we continue to look at is, are we seeing clusters in our schools? And those have been extremely limited. Are we seeing school spread where we want to shut down and bring in the state rapid mobile testing unit to test a whole bunch of people? That's a voluntary testing, but we could do that if we saw school spread. is the public health department able to contact trace? There was a day or two where they had 40 or 50 new cases where it was extremely challenging for them to do their contact tracing. They have used the state contact tracing service, and now we have agreed to pay all of our nurses to do more tracing in the evenings or on weekends as public health requires. And so they have additional assistance. But there could come a time when we have a large number of cases all at the same time and they can't contact trace. And if they can't contact trace, then I would need to close schools or classrooms where there might be transmission. And we don't want people to come into school if they've been exposed, if they're a close contact. And so that could be an instance where that might happen. Also, if in general, the governor says we're going to have a shutdown and it's not safe to be in schools, obviously, then we would close our schools. But in general, right now, we have had very good luck with limited in-school spread, with limited children at school who've been infectious, and with limited numbers of close contacts who've had to be quarantined. And so the main issue for us is, do we have adequate adults to staff? If we have too many people who are home because they're isolated, ill, quarantined, ill for another reason, caring for an ill child, we just don't have that many substitutes to open our schools safely. And so it could be that we would have to close, as many other districts have had to, because we just don't have enough adults. All of our teachers have been told that if we were to go to a closure, that they would immediately go into a remote learning situation where they would teach the classes they're normally scheduled to teach at the times they're normally scheduled to teach them, but do it remotely. In some limited instances, we have had some teachers who are quarantined who've been able to continue to teach from home, and we'll continue to do that as long as we're able to. So the positivity trends are concerning, where we have generally on any given day, on an average, 19 or 20 individuals in our schools who are positive. And in the town, it's running between 90 and 100 positive cases on any given day. That's a lot more than we had over the summer or early fall, but we are working really closely with public health. And right now, I am hopeful that we can stay open through the December break. And then upon the return, my only concern is that there'll be a lot of people who have to quarantine because they chose to travel. And I hope that they choose not to travel, because that places everybody at risk. And so I hope they do make the right choice and not travel, but if they do travel, that they abide by our travel quarantine restrictions that were imposed by Governor Baker. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions about positivity trends, but that's sort of what we're seeing right now.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Questions, comments? Seeing none.
Okay. Moving on to athletics. So I'm glad that Mr. Nixon asked Evan and Caroline how they felt about winter sports. I have to say, superintendents, as someone who used to coach track and cross country, to have to say to students, and all of my kids all ran all years of high school, to have to say to students, you can't participate this season is just heartbreaking to me. It's one of the highlights of many high school students' experience. It's an opportunity for them to challenge themselves as individuals and work with teammates. And to have to postpone any of those for health reasons is really heartbreaking. So the Middlesex League superintendents, athletic directors, and principals have met regularly to talk about how do we feel about the MIAA restrictions that have been placed on sports, which sports are safe to run, and how did it go in the fall? The fall sports season went well. There was no documented transmission across teams. It was all outdoors, however, and some of these sports are going to be indoors. And so there are lots of restrictions that the MIA has imposed, including including reduced numbers of athletes present, say for basketball, et cetera, and same rules for hockey. There are fewer restrictions on skiing because it's outdoors. I do want to say, since the last time we spoke, originally the ski team, the rate that the mountain was going to charge us was going to be prohibitive, and our athletic director went back and renegotiated, and now we're paying the same that we paid last year, and so that sport is going ahead. I don't have information on how many students have come up for tryouts. They only started yesterday. And the one rule that has been somewhat, we've gotten some pushback on is the no spectators rule. The athletic directors obviously are planning to videotape all of the contests and show them to parents either live or later. But this is something that as a group, the Middlesex League schools felt strongly about. And I know that there are arguments on both sides around spectators, but some of the league schools said that if we did not stick with this no spectator rule, at least to start, that they would not feel comfortable participating. And if we want to have contests, we all have to agree and reach consensus about what the rules are going to be, and we all have to abide by the same rules. If one venue allowed spectators and another didn't, then they were pretty explicit in some districts that they wouldn't send their kids to play our kids. So I realize this is a hardship for parents not to watch, but that is the, and there are some folks who are still concerned that student athletes might contract the illness or pass it along to somebody if they're asymptomatic. We're going to obviously track everyone's health carefully. All of this is subject to immediate suspension if the rates are too high or we see transmission or people can't abide by the rules. The Middlesex superintendents are going to meet shortly before the first games are scheduled, just to see how things are going, see if there's been any transmission, and see if we still feel comfortable with the seasons going ahead. So we're going to, keep a close eye on it, but I am pleased that for at least some students that they'll be able to participate in their usual winter sports, and be happy to answer any questions that someone might have.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Questions or comments from the committee members? Mr. Nixon?
Okay, so no surprise, I'm going to jump in. And I'm glad we heard from Caroline and Evan on this. And I'm thankful that students are appreciative of an expression that comes to mind a lot in my family in the midst of COVID, which is something is better than nothing. So to be able to play some sports is better than none. And sometimes those rules can be difficult. I want to say just firstly, a few quick things sort of as I see a school committee's role as it pertains to athletics. School committees really don't get into the weeds on when a season starts or when practices start. We don't get into the weeds on, when registration opens for a season. We always like to support our various sports when we have the numbers to run them. And so the downhill example that Dr. Evans gave a moment ago is a great example. If costs go up sharply, that's unwelcome news. But really, before the administration says we're not going to offer it, that should come back to the school committee and we have a conversation about, so what does it cost? And do we have some other options? And I think it's fantastic that Mark Aria was able to negotiate back to last year's rates so that we're able to do that. But really, the only reason why a sport would go away, I suppose there's two. The first is the downhill example where something just becomes so expensive we don't have the space in the budget. And the other is sometimes we just don't have the turnout that we need to field a team. And so there's some examples of that over the years. So I took a look at the flyer that went out from the Middlesex League superintendents and ADs, and a lot of what was in there, I think there's a phase 1 and a phase 2. Dr. Evans, one kind of pertains to registration and tryouts, and the other, I think, takes effect January 2nd or January 4th with the season itself. There was just one aspect of that that troubled me, which has to do with that no spectator rule. And I'm quite certain, I think some committee members got emails back in the fall. We had some pushback from parents on restrictions to see contests for fall sports. My concern actually isn't from that frame. I know how much parents would love to see their kids play and how much siblings would like to see their kids play. But I'm going to throw out something for this committee to just consider. Dr. Evans mentioned earlier, one of the successes of our cohorting model is that it's a small enough group, it's manageable, and that folks tend to follow the rules. That includes socially distancing and masks and so forth, in part because you're in a public space, right? So you're with your peers, you see one another, and so there's sort of expectations we have of one another about the rules that we should be following. And I'm going to tell you, I think that really can be, you can extend that to contests, whether they're inside or outside a building for high school sports. A concern I have for the winter season, Dr. Evans, is because so many of these contests happen indoors, and we'll take hockey as an example. Ms. Bergstrom had questions about that at the last meeting. I don't see this as an all or nothing proposition. The state last week, the governor, for instance, rolled back one step. So hockey rinks in Massachusetts, for example, must now operate at 40% capacity instead of 50. And what I can share with you, I think I said this at the last meeting, is most rinks are only allowing one, they call it a spectator. It's usually a parent. It's somebody who's driving, a student athlete. They just allow one extra person in the rink. And so with that expectation, rinks are at not even 5 or 10% capacity. They're pretty sparse. But those parents who are in the rinks, without exception, are wearing their masks and they're staying socially distanced. And I believe it's happening because they're actually in a space where we're seeing one another. And what I'm concerned about is and we've seen this happen earlier in the fall. I'm concerned that if we're not allowing just the one spectator per student, for kids who are being driven to the contest, and many of our students will be driven to contests, what do we think is happening if those parents or guardians are not being allowed into the venue? I will tell you what will happen. They will be congregating in parking lots. They will be closer than 6 feet. Some may not be wearing their masks, although they should be. My own anecdotal experience is the behavior that I see inside sports venues follows the rules much more than it, in fact, period. It just does compared to what takes place outside the venue. So my concern is that if we're black and white and say no spectators, that may make us feel better in terms of what's happening under a roof. But I am really concerned about what's happening outside those walls. And if that's really in the interest of public health, I would suggest that allowing one spectator is a reasonable thing to do. And I'm reminded of Scott Gottlieb, who's the former CDC director, was interviewed last month when everybody was expecting that the CDC would be issuing these shorter quarantine guidelines, which did come out, and we talked about those at a recent school committee meeting. And one of the things he acknowledged was that social acceptance of the prior quarantine guidelines was proving to be a challenge, and that many folks who were in quarantine and who were asymptomatic at, say, day 5 or day 6 were basically throwing in the towel and saying, this is silly, I feel fine, I'm not going to continue to quarantine. And his point was that when authorities having jurisdiction impose rules on the public that are just seen as onerous, you're going to get an increasing amount of non-conformance. And so I feel like this is why some facilities, hockey's one example, had simply said it's a 1-for-1. You got one player, you get one spectator. And as I said earlier, we're way under the limit that's been established by the state. And I think that's pretty manageable too in terms of how we can contact trace. As a practical matter, I would just again go back to something I shared at the last meeting. Winchester, we don't own a hockey rink. We rent ice. So our home rinks include Woburn, but that's not ours. That belongs to the city of Woburn. It includes Flynn, and that belongs to the state. And it's actually the rink operators that set the rules. So it seems to me the superintendent, the athletic director, and certainly coaches can have expectations of our student athletes. I'm not clear on what standing we have to tell a spectator they can't come into a space that's not even our space to begin with. So the enforcement of this is curious to me, and I would just offer that I think many facilities have responded as they have to the governor and to the Secretary of Environmental Affairs in scaling back their operations, and I think that they've been very effective in doing that. My last point, and I'm saying this broadly for all winter sports, but my last point, again, it's a hockey anecdote. I had a conversation with a Middlesex League hockey coach, not a Winchester coach, over the weekend, who told me of a game that they had to shut down because a player hit the boards with her head, and the parent was not in the rink. And it was a panic moment because nobody knew the cell phone number. They had to shut everything down. They had to find the parent. There just wasn't someone there to help in an emergency situation. And in this case, the coach was just kind of sharing it would be nice if you had someone there to help out in the event of an emergency, recognizing that's a very different scenario than the stands packed with screaming fans. So I would urge Dr. Evans, you guys to think this through a little bit more on the spectator piece and just understand, I think it is more than parents just wanting to be there to see their child. And I feel like it's the kind of issue that school committees should be a part of in the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Dr. Evans, I don't know if you have a response.
Certainly, I'll bring your concerns to the Middlesex League. We'll have another meeting soon to discuss this. Some other school districts felt very strongly about this. And it's not just a hockey issue, it's an indoor basketball, et cetera. It's a crowd management issue for the athletic directors. I know that there are some people who've written to you who say hockey parents who would like to have more spectators, not just one, but more. I have to say that, I am concerned about, I don't know if it's the culture of hockey or the nature, the closeness that people build when they're on a hockey team together, but we've had a large number of cases associated with hockey, not high school hockey, but other hockey teams so far this fall. Makes me less than comfortable about people following the rules. But I understand your concerns, and I'll raise it with the rest of the group. For me, it's most important. There are so few games, so few matches and games during this limited season that I would hate to have us not have contests because other schools won't participate if we let spectators in. So I'm trying to, manage the expectations of a lot of nervous people who are concerned about our kids and our coaches and other adults contracting COVID. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Any other questions from Ms. Bergstrom?
So, Dr. Evans, you've spoken to us frequently here at the table about how successful our schools are because of our cohorting model and our ability to keep kids 6 feet apart while they're indoors. We have an understanding from science and from public health that perhaps outdoor spaces and exercising outdoors is different than being inside a closed-in space, and perhaps spaces that may not have the same ventilation that our classrooms may have. There are a lot more variables that are out of our control in closed-in spaces like basketball, gymnasiums, and hockey rinks. How do you feel about now essentially breaking that cohort model by allowing hockey teams and basketball teams to practice, very often maybe coming within 6 feet of each other indoors, and then how that could potentially affect our cohort model in our school day?
So at the high school level, which is the only place we're doing sports, the students interact with, on average, 6 other classrooms worth of half size classrooms worth of students and teachers during the day. So we already have a lot of mixing at the high school. There's not really a cohort, except it's only half the number of people. So we have social distancing, but we essentially don't have cohorts, except that the same sort of same half of the class is there at the same time. So really the cohort is meant to limit the number of students who might be close contacts. I had the same reservations about basketball and gymnastics, which is the other kind of indoor sport, although you're not really close to other people with gymnastics the way you are with basketball. And I know that students will be masked. In the same way that Mr. Nixon brings a different perspective from his experience as a hockey parent, I think the reality is that at the high school level, our high school athletes have been playing indoor sports all fall in a variety of AAU or indoor soccer or other a lot of hockey, all our hockey players are playing hockey somewhere else. And so, I mean, that's the reality. They're all playing indoor sports somewhere, the basketball and the hockey players for sure. And so if we did not run basketball as a sport, we can be sure that all of our kids would play AAU basketball or find some other team to play on. And it would be far less structured, I would assume, in terms of masking and social distancing. And so those kids who are participating in outside activities who are becoming ill place the rest of our students at risk in the same way that mixing of cohorts would. So nearly all of the elementary students who've contacted COVID via an activity, it's been an outside sports related activity, not outdoor sports, but outside of our school. And so, you know, the trade-off is, do we not have basketball and then send all our basketball players to play in AAU in kind of unsupervised situations where they are more likely to contract illness and spread it? Or do we in season keep them playing just in our gym, only a couple of practices a week, one game per weekend, supervised? And so hard to know what the best route is. I share your concern. If we see any spread, we'll shut it down right away. But we can't control what our students and families are doing in their personal lives, and the percentage of our students who are involved in activities, whether it's, you know, dance or hockey or soccer or any other or pods where students are infected by other students in a pod, a social pod, a learning pod. That's out of our control. And so, you know, I share your concern that there could be spread, but I'm confident they'll be appropriately supervised and masked and follow the, you know, new rules that they have, which has been designed by the MIA to keep spread low. So I don't think there's any guarantee that it's going to be a 0% spread, but I'm hopeful that it's low. And if we see it, then we'll shut it down.
Do we know that our students won't still be participating in AAU leagues if we have that few practices and games? And
there are rules where they're supposed to only be on one, you know, on a high school team. And the superintendents asked the same question. Should we have them sign something saying they're not going to participate on other teams? You know, my feeling is that we would ask them not to, but like anything else in our personal lives in the United States, people have freedom of choice, and some people don't always make the best choice. And so I would hope that they wouldn't. We would make it clear we would expect them not to. But like anything else, it's if they violate the MIAA rules, then they're off the team. So.
Can I follow up on that, Mr. Chairman?
Dr. Evans, are you finished?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ms. Bergstrom raises an important point, one which we discussed at length with the other superintendents and really wrestled with this. Are we placing anyone else at risk by allowing basketball, say, to happen? But the reality is those students are already putting people at risk in ways that we can't control, that are completely out of our control. So that's my answer to that. I don't know that there's any, in this case, there's nothing that's ever black and white. Mr. Nixon, did you want to follow up?
Mr. Nixon.
I thought Dr. Evans just made an interesting point that I'm glad she made. Two quick thoughts. So I understand that in some districts in the Middlesex League, coaches of winter sports are telling their teams that they're not going to be allowed to play other sports, or they're not, and if they do, they're not going to be able to play. And that's just what you were describing. I hope that does not happen in Winchester. I don't think that's our place to say that. And I want to be really clear why. Dr. Evans just mentioned there are kids who are playing club basketball in the fall. There are kids who play club hockey. In my family, hockey stops for 2 weeks in May. That is it. It is a 50-week sport. So we have some student athletes with visions on playing in college. And especially because of COVID right now, where coaches and scouts and so forth can't travel, visibility is very difficult. And so, in fact, many coaches are encouraging student athletes to stay up on their training and their competition. The conflict that Dr. Evans just mentioned, it's cited in the MIAA. It's called the pro bono rule. So if you play, for instance, varsity basketball at Winchester High School, you can't be playing for a club basketball team and have a schedule conflict. It basically says Winchester comes first, but that doesn't prevent you from playing other club sports. And you may be a multi-sport athlete, which is a good thing for, you know, the body and the mind, the soul. The one thing I would push back, Dr. Evans, on what you were saying is when you're comparing our high school sports experience to those club activities, you described them as less structured and maybe greater potential for infection. I'm going to push back and say, unless you have some firsthand knowledge of that, I wouldn't agree with that, only because I feel like in the club world, there's actually tremendous now oversight and attention towards doing the right things because people's economic livelihoods depend on it. So if a club gets shut down, the arena or the rink, the venue loses the revenue. You've got directors of programs who no longer earn a paycheck because families are no longer going to pay them because somebody screwed up. And I really have to credit the state for setting an example early. I know, and again, in the hockey world back in August, the Office of Environmental Affairs paid surprise visits to hockey rinks at a time when there was supposed to be no scrimmages, no games, and they visited some rinks and they saw that going on and they padlocked the doors. And I just, you know, kudos to the state, and they've made similar inspections on venues of all sorts of sports, whether it was, you know, a high risk or a medium risk. The low risk sports are sort of a different ball of wax. So I would just say, to the extent that there are perceptions about what the club sports world is like in any winter sport, that it is somehow more risky or less structured, we should be reluctant to make that assumption unless we have some firsthand knowledge. I think it is incredibly well structured and organized. And in fact, the folks who are running, you know, high school sports, you know, they've got a paycheck. And that's important to us. We had that discussion in the spring, right? When it was important for us that we pay our spring coaches, whether the sport runs or not. But that's not the case in the private world. So I just want to be cautious about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Any other questions or comments from committee members? Evan, any questions or comments from you as a student athlete yourself?
No, I thank you. I've been glad to listen in, and I feel like I've learned a lot, but I don't think I have any questions at the moment.
Thank you very much. We are very appreciative to have you here. Thank you.
Mr. Vanalia,
yes.
Dr. Evans or Ms. Whittemore, could you just address in the fall, just real quickly, there have been some questions, I think, in the community about the sports fee and whether it's going to remain the same for the year, given the shortened seasons and the fewer contests and things like that. Could we just address real quickly? Because I think in the fall, the school committee said we were going to address this season by season, and maybe that was a misunderstanding. But if we could just real quick hit on that. I don't need a long discussion. I'd just like to make it clear what we're going to do about it.
Thank you. Ms. Whittemore, if you are able and willing to address Ms. Bergstrom's question.
So as far as modifying the user fee, it was my understanding that we would be doing that if it was going to be the season was going to be impacted further, or if there were going to be additional costs associated with the season that had been unanticipated. At this juncture, I have spoken to Mr. Oria about costs, and that there had been nothing that was unforeseen that would indicate that we would need to raise user fees for the winter season. He had connected with me a couple of weeks ago to open up registration for the winter season, and did not indicate that there would be any reason to revisit user fee amounts for the winter season.
Okay, thank you. So keeping it at the rate it is what we need to keep it at to sustain sports for the year.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Seeing no additional questions or comments, Dr. Evans, if you are so inclined, move on to the next topic. Thank you very much.
Sure. So planning for in-person learning. if this were an easy thing to do, we would have done it already, and we would have done it to start the year. And so it has been challenging to try to look at options. But principals and the COVID-19 planning and implementation team discussed this at a previous meeting. We have another meeting this week to discuss it. The things that we're looking at that are kind of guiding questions are first, looking at the Wednesday separation between the two cohorts. How could we use this to increase in-person learning? You might remember that half a day on Wednesday is used for a full class remote learning in order to keep both cohorts kind of on the same page and have teacher check-ins. So that Wednesday half day. Also in the afternoon, all of the students who are in for 4 days because they're receiving pretty intensive special education services have their specials like library, music, PE remotely. So Wednesdays are used for lots of things. You might also remember that teachers are doing planning together to be sure that they're all on the same page across the district, across grade levels, within content areas. They're also planning for the asynchronous activities that students are given through choice boards or through other assignments in 6 through 12. So there are some trade-offs if we were to use Wednesdays in a different way. And the reality is, even if we used Wednesdays and had students in for alternating Wednesdays or a half day each on Wednesdays, it's the same amount of learning time as they have now with the remote sessions on Wednesday mornings. So it's more in person, but it could be at a sacrifice of overall teacher contact time, depending on how we configure it. The other thing we want to look at is what is the impact on overall instructional hours, to be sure that any change we make does not eliminate the at-home service portion. Middle schoolers get world language and then 2 other electives on each of the days they're home. High schoolers get full classes on the days that they're home for a couple of classes. And so we want to make sure that we don't have an impact on overall instructional hours, whatever change we make. We also want to look at any impact there would be on transmission and contact tracing. You probably have heard that one member of the Board of Health expressed the opinion that students should be back more fully in person and that there was no need to do cleaning or disinfection in between cohorts. I'm not sure that everyone in our district would agree with that or feel comfortable with that. I think there are a lot of educators and parents who feel that the cleaning in between student groups is extremely important. It's also time consuming. And so changing the cohort configuration or the not having that Wednesday and Saturday full time to disinfect and deep clean could be problematic for some people. What other changes could be made in the weekly schedule to improve learning? We're trying to really think outside the box, within the limitations of staffing and space. And so some of the things we're considering, I just wanted to share with you at a very superficial level and get your initial feeling about that. We'll go into it with more detail. Principals will present tomorrow at the COVID-19 planning and implementation team. They've been working with faculty members to examine options. So one option would be to bring students back for more in-person time on Wednesdays by cohort, alternating Wednesdays. As I said, there are some trade-offs for this. We're doing almost all of our IEP meetings for students with specialized learning needs on those days. It's all where the teacher planning takes place, et cetera. It would require some schedule changes. Everything has a cost, but if the benefit is greater than the cost, then we'll try to make that choice. Wednesdays are the easiest day without changing anything else to get more in-person time. We've also thought about bringing our youngest students back, K and 1 students. You know that all of our preschool students are there for 4 full days, so there's none of this affects them. But we've thought about bringing our kindergarten and 1st grade hybrid students back by cohort for some additional hours during their at-home days, particularly for literacy support. And so that could be accomplished through careful scheduling and rescheduling of reading specialists and perhaps hiring some reading tutors to work with K and 1 students on the days when they would normally be at home. It would require parent transport, but it could be fairly not easily accomplished in terms of schedule and staffing, but without affecting a lot of other classes that they have. those students who have at-home special education services, or they already have their special subjects like art and music and PE, we'd have to work around that. But there's a possibility we could bring K-1 students back for some more hours for some additional literacy support. The other thing we looked at is some of our kindergarten hybrid classrooms have small class sizes. If we wanted to be really bold, we could take our whole kindergarten cohort and reshuffle them and hire a couple of more kindergarten teachers, reassign some teachers, perhaps reassign some schools, and bring all kindergarten students back for 4 full days. That would be extremely challenging, but it's a possibility. I'm not sure how many kindergarten parents would like their kindergarten student to be reassigned to another teacher, whether the additional days of instruction would be possible. The biggest concern I have is that if a lot of fully remote kindergarten parents want to then bring their kids back, we don't have enough room for them under that scenario. It's a very tight kind of space issue. We have some classrooms open, and we have some space in some classrooms, but not others, in some schools, but not others. And so it would be a major shakeup. But that's something I like your general first impression about. None of the options we've considered for grades 6 through 12, except the use of Wednesdays, result in an increased in-person instructional time. And they really would have very detrimental effects on the current courses that students have, because so many of our teachers can only teach remotely. It may be that the students' schedules would change in the second semester and they lose some of the courses they currently have if we were to do a major shakeup, especially at the high school level. So the high school level has really looked at options like eliminating the Wednesday day off and going every other day AB, which leaves very little time for the disinfecting and deep cleaning, and doesn't give students any more. They're still every other day, they're completely without any classes at all. It doesn't really give them a lot more instructional time. So those are the options we've looked at. What I need to do next is to survey parents in the next week to determine how many are thinking about changing models and under what circumstance would they change models, because this will have an impact on which options might be available to us. So I'm just looking for sort of questions, thoughts, initial impressions to give to the COVID-19 planning and implementation team and leadership team as we wrestle with how best to bring students back for more in-person time. So to summarize, I think the low-hanging fruit is we could possibly do something on Wednesdays. We could possibly also offer more direct instruction to students beyond the morning remotely. That's another possibility. I think we can also manage to bring back some, at least kindergarten students, but perhaps first grade students for some additional time on the days when they would normally be home for literacy activities for at least a couple of hours on 1 or 2 days. And so those are the options we're looking at. Jen or Lori, I know you met with the elementary principals today. Is there anything that I have forgotten, misrepresented? Anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered it.
I covered it. Okay. So just sort of clarifying questions, impressions, concerns.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Ms. Marchant, I saw you had your hand raised first.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Evans, I would really encourage us to protect our operations around the hybrid model. I don't want to do anything to put that at risk. It has been, I know a lot of parents are sad about the remote days and the choice board, but I think we can work around those and try to support each family individually at the building level. But I absolutely don't want to risk the hybrid model that, from what I hear, has been very successful. One parent reported to me that during their child's parent-teacher conference, the teacher informed her that the kids are they're not behind by more than a week in terms of their learning. So what we're doing in the hybrid model, that's all I can speak to, is really working. And I really want us to protect that. I like the idea of creating more opportunities for the younger students around literacy. And so I still think that that could be built into the remote days. I don't also want to invade into the Wednesday planning time. I think teachers have valued that time, and I think they're more successful as a result. I see a lot of coordination in the grade level planning. They're really working as teams, and this is what is required for people to be able to be a team. And so those are things I think have worked so well that I would hate any changes to intrude into them. But I'm open to the ideas of developing new kinds of programming around literacy, or specific topics that parents can work through, because I know that the special education teams, the direct instruction, the 1-to-3 ratio around literacy, around comprehension has been phenomenal. And so to open that up more broadly to all students, I think is a great thing that maybe the building level planners can start working on. But please protect our hybrid model. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Marchant. Mr. Nixon.
I really appreciate what Ms. Marchant just said, and I couldn't have said it better, just with respect to kind of protecting what's working now. I think it's very well said. And so I also believe the devil's in the details. So it's really clear that, particularly among parents in the elementary community, there's a lot of interest and one might say pressure to use those Wednesdays because the kids aren't in school. I would have a lot of questions about literally the details. How would it work? Would it be, because I'm all about sort of equity of access, equity of opportunity. So would this mean, cohort AA is in school Monday, Tuesday, and then for, let's say, a third of the day on Wednesday, but only a third, and then cohort BB, they start in the third of Wednesday, and then they're in school Thursday, Friday. And I would suggest dividing it that way because of the concern about contact spread and fomites. I mean, we still have, there are many examples of, institutions with these ionizing machines, going around spraying surfaces, and that's how the airlines are cleaning their play. We've got hockey rinks that are using those too. So in my mind, to have such a large group of students in an elementary school on a Wednesday morning, and then they leave at some point, because I'm assuming we have to split that Wednesday between the cohorts, if you clearly can't do a full day's worth of deep cleaning. So what are you doing, and who's doing it, and what is it going to cost? And does that cost more or less than the deep cleaning that DPW is paying for on a Wednesday? And then you have to then balance that with what's the value educationally of having that. I'm saying third of the day, maybe it would be more, but it would take some small team of people some amount of time to clean or sanitize, whatever the right sort of word is, a building. And the other thing I was thinking of as I was listening to Zena speak was, although the students, we're separating the students, we're not separating the teachers. So there's risk there too, because you'd have classroom teachers who will have spent 2 1/3 days with one cohort, and then, an hour and a half, 2-hour break for lunch and some cleaning, and suddenly they're with another group. So now there's a risk for further spread. So it's just I wanted to ask you, Dr. Evans, if you were going to sort of poll parents to see what interest there is, I'd have to assume there's going to be a lot of interest in the details. Parents might want to know literally how is it going to work. So I would be careful about that. And I'd be careful that, whatever details you're providing are things that you really believe are actionable. And then I think, remembering the blowback we heard from remote families who felt like what they got wasn't what we had talked about early on in the process. I think that there are families who are still very anxious when they send their kids to school each week just for 2 days. And if we were to substantially change the model and you've got both cohorts in a building on a Wednesday, I think we should be prepared for, and we should allow parents who are current families who are hybrid today to say this represents a risk that's no longer tolerable, and we want to go fully remote. I really believe that. Out of concern for the very thing that Zena was just talking about, is it might put what works now in jeopardy, and some people just don't want to take that risk.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Ms. Bergstrom.
Wasn't sure if you could see me through my background.
I wanted to give Dr. Evans an opportunity to respond if she felt so inclined, and that's why I was going slowly.
Well,
go ahead, Ms. Bergstrom.
Oh, did Dr. Evans want to respond to Mr.?
No, she did not.
Okay. I think both speakers made good points, and this is one where there's no easy path. If it had been easy and clear and the right thing to do, we would have already done it. And so it is extremely difficult to plan and manage this and to have confidence that we're going to be able to keep our schools open if we do. And so that's my biggest concern. So anxious to hear what your response is, Ms. Bergstrom.
So I wanted to second Mr. Nixon's comments on equity as well, because I think that while we are talking about the hybrid model, we do still have a full remote model that over 20% of our students are using too. So any increased instructional time or access to in-person instruction or staff, I think we need to keep in mind that we would have to mimic that in a remote model as well. So it's not just that we're looking to change, but it could potentially be two systems that we're looking to change. And I think that that's just another added layer sort of to that operational, those operational challenges that Ms. Marchant was speaking to. And I think we also have to keep in mind the cost benefit ratio of any changes that we're making. So there are, for every change that we make, there's going to be a trade-off that we have. So while we may gain something somewhere, I think that our parents need to be aware that there might be something else that is lost in doing that. So I would want to be incredibly clear before we get to the point of surveying parents what the clear choices are that we see that we have, and what the pros and cons of each of those choices are. Because I think if we asked any parent if they wanted more in-school instruction of any kind at this point, for the most part, anybody with a student in school would say yes. But understanding what cost comes with that is going to be an important part of our communication strategy. And the last thing I think I would like to keep in mind as we talk about this is what our educators are valuing right now and what they see as valuable to student learning. And we need to also listen to them if they think there are things that aren't working, because this is a brand new model to all of us. Not every district is using the same model. Not every, sometimes even within districts, different models are being used. So there are lessons being learned right now. There were many of them discussed at a DESE board meeting, in fact, this morning, of things that are working and not working in other districts across Massachusetts. So I wouldn't want to be so set in our ways and so convinced that what we're doing is 100% right that we would miss out on any opportunities to improve on what we're doing in the second semester either. Because I could equally opine, hearing from a remote parent, that their students are exactly on track with where they are supposed to be for this point in the year too. So I think a lot of what we're doing speaks not only to our model, but the extraordinary talents of the educators in this district and their flexibility and their ability to adapt to these different things we have put in front of them. So I would certainly want to hear their voice and make sure their voice is heard in any changes they think would be of value to students in the second semester.
Agreed, totally.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. Any additional, Ms. Bolognese?
Thank you, Mr. Verdalia. I was just going to echo a few of the comments. I agree that we would need to be very clear about what the choices are and a description of the choices and the pros, the advantages and disadvantages of each choice, so that our parents and families and educators can all understand what we're looking at and what we're grappling with. I am curious to understand, and I think if we're surveying parents in the coming week or so, then we just need to be very clear about that before we survey the parents. And I would be very curious to see what families and educators have to say with regard to that survey. And then I guess I'm just curious about the timeline. I know you had talked about bringing back a draft to school committee at the beginning of January and looking to implement more towards the end of January. And do you still see that as a possibility? Because that just seems like a really tight timeline.
No, it certainly is. So to your first question about, how specific we are in the survey, really one of the things that I need to know is whether families are thinking of making a shift from remote to hybrid or the reverse for a number of factors. Even if we don't change anything about our models, I've asked people to hold off until January to make that shift so that we could plan for staff. Right now, at the middle school level in particular, and at the high school level in some classes, we can't welcome any more remote students back in because there's no room in those classes. They have to switch teams or switch their schedules completely. At the elementary level, it's easier to move students from hybrid to remote. Sometimes it's not always easy in a given school to move them back into hybrid because there might not be an open cohort with space, or and certainly it's pretty disruptive if they have to change teachers. And so we want to make sure they do that not many times during the year. We've had some people asked to go remote once during the winter and then go back to hybrid, but switching teachers 3 times a year is not necessarily a good practice educationally, and I think it would really put students at risk. So my feeling was to first survey people about their desire to switch models from remote to hybrid or the reverse, and would increased learning time, even in a small amount, have an impact on that decision. And really that not to give them a range of choices or lots of information yet. If a lot of parents at the K-1 level decided to come back to the hybrid model, we'd actually have to open more hybrid classes. Because at some grade levels at some schools, there's simply no room for anyone more to come back. So there are a lot of factors here, even if we don't change our model at all, just in the natural shifts that happen between hybrid and remote, especially at the K-5 level and the middle school level. And then in relation to course changes at the high school level. There are a lot of things planned for January that make changing things on Wednesdays probably not feasible. So I think the earliest we do this is at the very end of January or beginning of February. For instance, AuthorFest, which is a dearly beloved institution, is scheduled to run several Wednesdays in January. And the rapid rise in cases now in our community is likely to continue to extend into January after the holidays. And so bringing more students back in person while case counts continue to climb, might push this out even into March. It really does depend on what the community spread is, what the school spread is, et cetera. So we just want to be sure that we are direct and honest about what we can and can't do. And those parents who really want their children back in school more in person, we're trying to look at every option to make that happen. But the comments about how do the educators feel, certainly they all have been or will be involved in giving us feedback on any plan that we'll put forward to you. So the plan that is the most disruptive is a complete shake up of all the kindergarten classrooms to bring kindergarten kids back in small classes of 12 for 4 days. I have little enthusiasm to do that. I think it's almost as beneficial to bring them back for additional literacy in person or provide more remote support. But I just wanted to make sure we put all options on the table for your feedback.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. I just wanted to follow up when you talk about doing the surveys. An analogy that I find I'm using almost daily now is sort of the chicken and the egg analogy, is that we don't know how many people are going to come back unless you have a fully fleshed out plan. But if you have a fully fleshed out plan, you can't have that unless you know how many people are going to come back. So I think that what that ultimately means is multiple surveys, and that's what you've had to do in the past. And so while I do appreciate what some other committee members are saying, that people need to know the clear options, the first round of surveys is not going to be a clear option. It's going to be a rough option, and I appreciate that. And I think as long as we're clear about that, when people are doing that survey, your edification and your planning, not for their decision making. So that's one thing I wanted to add. And then the other is something that you sort of you went over quickly, and I want to reinforce, which is making changes at the middle school, or even more specifically at the high school level. And I wanted to express my apprehension against any change that would result in students who are currently in a course no longer being able to take that course. We could certainly talk about whether it meant a student had to move from one teacher to another. That's something that could happen at the end of a semester. But if it resulted in somebody who was in chemistry no longer being able to take chemistry, to me, that would be just a bridge too far, and I'm not sure I would want to make a change that resulted in that. So I just want to get on record of saying that while I want our students in more, especially at the K-1 level, at the high school level, I think we need to be really careful, as you mentioned you are going to be, and as you have been. So I'm not telling you anything they're not already doing, but I just wanted to sort of emphasize it, since we're mostly focusing on sort of K-5 level. So
sure, I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, can I throw one other item out there?
Absolutely, Mr. Nixon.
So I forgot to ask about this earlier. If we were to seriously consider changing the hybrid model to include Wednesday, what we're saying is that wouldn't be an option. That would just sort of be the new hybrid. It would incorporate Wednesday somehow. So then the transportation question comes up. So we are busing for 20% fewer instructional days than a typical year, because Wednesday we don't have kids going to school. And so my question would then be, and you don't have to give an answer right now, but this has significant budgetary impact for us. If we are finding a way to get cohorts AA and BB into a school on a Wednesday, that would suggest to me we're actually making 2 bus runs on a Wednesday, which means we're not running 5 days worth of buses like we did last year, or 4 days like we're doing right now, but we may be running 6 days worth of buses during a 5-day educational week. So having a sense, Dr. Evans and Ms. Whittemore, of how transportation, first of all, could North Suburban actually do that to support us, but what would that look like? And a sense of cost, and our ability to shoulder the cost would be, I think, another critical factor for us. Thank you.
Are there additional questions, comments on anything we've discussed during this agenda item? Ms. Bolognese.
One more question. Is there if we've been talking about the hybrid model, but is there any corresponding impact on the full remote model? Or are they, is there any corresponding impact?
Right. So the full remote model won't change for middle and high school, but you're talking about the elementary full remote, where a teacher works with the same group of students for the whole week. Some of the elements of the full remote schedule that place restrictions are the additional services or special subjects that those students participate in, which we're fairly rigid in scheduling, because those providers work with lots of students, both remote and in person. So Our goal in setting the objectives for the full remote K-5 schedule was to limit the consecutive hours of Zooms for those young students so that they're not, looking at a screen all day for the same amount of time. So what we're looking for is an equivalent instructional experience for full remote and for hybrid in terms of the course objectives, the content, and the number of hours that they would be receiving instruction, and a way to connect them to their home school. So if we were to make any changes to have more in-person time on Wednesdays, it's not overall an increase in instructional time, because on Wednesdays now for the mornings, remote students and in-person students, the two halves of the hybrid class are together on the Wednesday mornings as a whole class. And so I don't think it's going to be that the full remote students will get more instructional time, but we'll make any adjustments we need to make to the individual teacher schedules to ensure that the amount of time and that the course objectives stay the same for both full remote and for hybrid students.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Seeing no additional questions, thank you for this update, and I guess more to come in the new year and between now and then. This won't stop between meetings, of course. With that, I would like to move on to the next agenda item, which is the Select Board Anti-Racism Initiative. Ms. Bolognese, if you could welcome in Chairperson Betancourt, who I believe I saw in the waiting room. And in the meantime, I'll just give a quick background. The Select Board is beginning a multi-phase anti-racism project, and they've invited school committee a member to participate. The first stage is an assessment conducted by an organization, FMRA, and I sent out something to the committee mentioning this was going to take place, and that Ms. Bolognese did actually attend the first meeting that took place. But seeing as the time that this started was in between meetings, I wanted to make sure that we could have Mr. Betancourt come and give us sort of his overview of what's taking place and what is being asked of the school committee and the school department. Mr. Betancourt, welcome.
Thank you, Brian and school committee and Dr. Evans and everyone here, big crew. I won't be long, but the select board and the school committee really in the spring started having the discussion about racism, really in the context of the George Floyd murder and the kind of heightened awareness locally around that, and especially coming from a lot of young people in our community, and realized that we needed to really shift from having an understanding of moving towards anti-racism rather than just trying not to be racist. And so one of the pieces that we began with is to start with an analysis of our organizational structure. And I apologize that my video is not working. I'm kind of in between the Affordable Housing Trust meeting and this one, so having some technical difficulties. But the very first stage is for the consultant. The organization's called Ephemera, and they will be evaluating kind of how we do things in Winchester. So we'll be analyzing at the ground level how town government works, how the school committee works, and how we all kind of interact with each other. And so this is the very first stage of this process, where we're just giving the consultants a point of engagement to understand Winchester, how things work, and frankly, for us to have an understanding of what our organizational structure looks like as we move towards what we see as a multi-year process of really establishing ourselves as an anti-racist community. And so we appreciate the support of the school committee. Certainly at this stage, there'll be many different pieces along the way that that we'll engage with the school department in. And I know Lori was also at one of our meetings on Friday, which was fantastic. And so I think we're really getting an idea of how things work and kind of looking at things at a more granular level. So happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Betancourt. If anyone has any questions or comments, I invited Mr. Betancourt because I wanted to be clear that if an initiative was taking place in town and welcoming in a member or members from the school department and school committee, that we had an understanding of what's taking place and what was what commitment we were signing on to as far as certainly this worthy endeavor. So I wanted to make sure that we weren't caught unaware. So I welcome questions or comments from the committee if they have any thoughts.
Brian, can we just share with the community who our representative is? Do we have you selected?
I saw my apologies. I thought I did. Ms. Bolognese agreed to be representative because we did it in between meetings. So it was not an opportunity for us to be present to actually have this discussion. So they were looking for a member and she offered. So I would assume that the committee would be supportive of her as our representative to this group. And in fact, Mr. Betancourt, at one point you said that multiple members, obviously not more than two, were welcome. Is that still the case, or were you still looking more specifically for one member?
Sure. I mean, I think at this, the first stage of it was the assessment piece, which Karen came to and Lori was there for. So it's really a way for them to kind of look at us and understand how we do things. And so there's certainly this kind of assessment piece will be completed early February, and then we'll go on to the next stage. So there's going to be multiple opportunities for engagement from members of the school department and the school committee. So, and you know, we feel that that's a necessary component of the work that we're trying to do. So.
Thank you, Mr. Betancourt. Mr. Nixon.
So just a quick question for Mr. Betancourt. So Brian did previously, he forwarded an email, I think you'd sent the chair about this opportunity. It looks really exciting. But for the school committee and others who are watching tonight, do you have a proposal document from FMRA, or have you outlined a work scope, a schedule, some concept of maybe deliverables along the way as investigations are completed? Where can folks in Winchester go to learn more about the process and the steps in the process?
Thanks, Chris. We do. I can circulate at least the first stage of this. The next part of it will be engaging more stakeholders like the Network for Social Justice. So we'll act as kind of a facilitator and consultant for us as well. So working with ephemera. So the first piece I'll circulate. I think maybe I'd sent it to Brian, but maybe not. I can certainly include everyone along in the next stage of the process, but we're kind of developing it as we go along because we're learning as we go along.
So I appreciate that. So the beauty of you not being on the school committee is that you can do anything you want to the whole school committee. Yeah. That's one of many beauties of not being on the school committee. I hear my peers chuckling as they say that. So obviously, if there's anything sort of official of record you want Mr. Vernaglia to distribute, you can do that. But if you want to keep the full committee sort of updated from time to time, either with what's going on or public meetings or what have you, don't be shy about broadcasting it that way.
And to second what Mr. Nixon just said, if you forward it directly to the entire committee, it's much preferable than forwarding it to me and having me forward it to the committee, which can possibly open meeting violations, which you can't have by forwarding to all of us.
Sounds good.
Ms. Marchand.
I was just wondering if Mr. Betancourt can tell us, I may have missed it and I apologize, but how was ephemera vetted and who exactly are they and what's the end result that we're expecting, especially from the viewpoint of what's in our realm, the school, the district?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Ina. I think that just to your first question, there somebody that we connected with locally who had engaged a resident and town meeting member who had engaged us actually in a different capacity. And we started the discussion about this piece of it and wanted to move forward, at least with the assessment stage. What their focus is analysis of organizational structure, as I said. And so that was important for us to start there, to evaluate, not just say, how do we educate people on racism and what anti-racism is and, give people a book with information, but to say, what are the existing structures in our town that keep us from moving forward? And how do we unravel that and unwind that? Because at a certain point, there are, existing structures that we're familiar with and used to, and it's the kind of standard operating procedure, but it prevents us from really making the necessary improvements as we pursue an anti-racism philosophy and agenda and practice. So the goal is somewhat obtuse at this point. I mean, we're being an anti-racist community is the goal. How we get there, it's kind of a choose your own adventure. And Ephemera met with the Network for Social Justice as well. So, we really wanted a local connection, and we really wanted it to be something that we could build off over a period of years. There's been the network certainly does engages on this topic quite a bit, and a lot of communities kind of coming out of the same understanding that we did in the spring said we're going to draw a line in the sand. We're going to pursue this, and there's been some success, and there's been some issues in other communities that we've seen where they haven't made the kind of progress because it just had been very top down. And, we hope that we're going to address, every structural issue we can. And certainly the schools are an important part of what we're looking towards.
So I really appreciate you taking the leadership on this. And I see this as a learning opportunity. And so I would personally appreciate any information on this this organization, because this is a huge task they're undertaking, even at a small community like ours. And so I would love to learn more about them if you have any information that you can send my way. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marchant. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Ms. Bolognese?
I can just provide a little bit of an update from last Friday, if that would be useful.
Yes, it would, please.
And as Mr. Betancourt had said, Ms. Kirby and I were both able to participate in the meeting last Friday, which was basically just a group interview with a number of either elected officials or appointed persons from town. And I believe there was another group that had also previously been interviewed that mainly consisted of town staff. And I would say that the discussion was mainly focused a lot around town government, how we would describe it, and then some of the, as Mr. Betancourt had indicated, some of the committees in town, what their roles are, some of the policies and procedures in town, and then a question around who needs a voice in town. And then I think more towards the end of the discussion, there was a little bit about, well, what can we learn? I think circling back to a connection with the schools, there was a little bit of introspection on, well, what can we learn from schools, and then vice versa, between the town and the schools. I don't know if Mrs. Kirby has any more to add to that. That was my takeaway.
Ms. Kirby, if you have anything, we would be delighted to hear.
I think Karen did an outstanding job. Thank you. And Michael, thanks.
So thank you to all of you. Thank you, Mr. Betancourt. What I would actually look for the committee, this is not an action item, although we certainly could make it an action item, but I would sort of look for consensus that we allow Ms. Bolognese to continue to interact with this initiative for the time being. And I would also ask if anybody else is interested in also being a part of that. We are not required to do any of this. We are volunteering, and she has volunteered as a member to help with this. But I would certainly, if someone else was interested in being involved, as Mr. Betancourt said, we can have 2 members involved. So just looking, 1 is enough as well. So do we have some consensus to allow Ms. Bolognese to be our liaison to this initiative? Yeah, I see that. So excellent. Thank you very much. Mr. Betancourt, thank you for coming tonight to give us this overview. Very helpful, and I appreciate it. Don't be a stranger. We always love to have you at our meetings.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, and thank you for all you do. Take care.
You're very welcome. Thank you. With that, Ms. Bolognese, I would ask if you could help Mr. Betancourt back into the attendees, and we will move on to the next agenda item, which is the revision of job descriptions. I believe, am I right in the right order? Yes, thank you. We have 2 job descriptions that we are looking to make new positions, and I would turn it over to well, actually, Dr. Evans, even though you're not listed as first, I'll kick it off to you, and then you can divvy it off to whoever should be addressing it.
Sure. So as a central office, we've been discussing how well we're supporting technology, both for teaching and learning and business applications. And one of the things we thought might be useful was to revise the job descriptions for these 2 positions to an administrator of information technology services and network manager, and then a coordinator of digital learning and innovation, to separate the educational function from the more technical function. And so I would rather not get into too many details tonight about who's going to hold these positions. Who's going to, sorry, my dog is misbehaving. Who's going to hold these positions, but rather just sort of the components of the job description standing alone as job descriptions. And then we'll come back to you once these have been revised for a vote on the job descriptions, as we do with every job description that we change. And so Jen and Lori, I don't know if there's anything, or Ellen, anything you want to say about the 2 positions and what your thoughts were, is because they were the primary ones who developed these job descriptions, these proposed job descriptions for you.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Dr. Ellen Emma?
I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't want to just read from the job description, so happy to jump in with anything.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kirby, anything you want to throw out there?
No, same thing. We're open to any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Marchant, I see your hand raised.
Thanks, Brian. I was a director of IT in Illinois for a court system, and I have to say, when I read these 2 job descriptions, I was so happy that you split the 2 apart, and I think it was a brilliant move because when I was fortunate enough to have that position, I served more of the judicial role, like the lawyer going in and talking about what the needs are. And I had a whole technical department to back me up that really had a broad range of technical experts. And it's such a different job. And so I really commend you on this move, and I fully support it. And I think it's the best use of our staff and in support of all of you and Dr. Ellen Emma's role, where you have taken this educational, innovative side of it. And so I'm wholeheartedly in support of this new setup.
Thank you, Ms. Marchant. Additional questions or comments from committee members?
I have some.
Mr. Nixon.
So first, I'm just going to ask a dumb question. Who is today our Director of Student Learning? Because that's not a title that's in my head.
So these are both positions that would report to the assistant superintendent. And there are some personnel issues that I'd rather not get into more specifics as far as who's holding these positions or parts of these positions. We've had some transitions in personnel.
I'm not intending to take it that direction. I don't know. I didn't know do we have today a Director of Student Learning?
No.
Okay, so, and I'm asking because there's two job descriptions here, and it says one of these, the administrator for IT works under the direction of the Director of Student Learning. But the other job description is Coordinator of Digital Learning and Innovation. So is that supposed to be one and the same? Does the first position report to the Coordinator of Digital Learning, or do we have a Director of Student Learning and then we'll have a Coordinator of Digital Learning? I'm just trying to.
No, I'm going to just jump in on this one. The Director of Student Learning was probably just a typo because we went to a lot of different districts and gathered different ideas from their job descriptions and took the best of it. So I'm guessing that's just something we missed on that one. But okay. I'll take a look and send you feedback.
Okay, so then I want to ask just a more open-ended question then. What is the work, a little flow chart might be, a real simple flow chart would be helpful to understand the working relationship between these two positions. I know Dr. Evans just said one would report directly to Janelle and Emma, but it's interesting Ms. Marchant said what she did because these are, as I understand it, most public districts struggle with this idea that you can find somebody who has like primarily a tech computer science background and then somehow finds themselves in a career path that takes them down, the public education realm, but sort of in their heart, they're an IT person, right? Or then there's the inverse, which is somebody who began their career in education and managed to pick up the IT piece. And so it's very hard to find those skill sets. And it's, on the one hand, it makes sense to split them, but it would be helpful for me to understand just really, really clearly who reports to who, and also to fix the typos so it's really explicit when we refer to other positions.
Sure. So sorry we missed that. What I would say is this is great feedback. What we'll have for the next version for your vote will include perhaps a description of the two types of people who support these functions, our tech integration specialists, our help desk folks. We have very few people who support technology in the districts. The ones we have do it brilliantly and have allowed us to support remote learning this year to an extraordinary extent pretty seamlessly. But when you see how many people are responsible for over 5,000 users every day, we're quite slim in terms of our resources there. So, but I think that's a good idea. Who do these positions report to and who reports to them? And we'll put that in a little flow chart and we'll give it to you for the next meeting.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Ms. Bergstrom.
I just had a quick question as well. I actually had a similar question to Mr. Nixon about who reports to whom, not only within these two positions, but throughout the district. So who will support each of these positions? I wasn't clear if the coordinator of digital learning and innovation would be somebody who was more of an administrative position or more of a teacher, educator centered position. And I'm curious to hear from Dr. Alanema how she sees this working with the educators and how does this fit in?
Yeah, you're right, that's on the same lines, I think, as some of the pieces Chris was asking. So I think we see them as partners. these two positions. And I think the flow chart will be helpful because I see it as like two branches of the tree, right? That kind of comes out from central office. We have kind of that technical piece like Zena was talking about, and we have the educational piece, but obviously working closely together. To kind of categorize it, the help desk tech support would fall under the network IT person, and the ITS, the instructional technology people, would fall under the digital learning and innovation. So that would kind of be the educational side, and so if you think of it like infrastructure and structure, and then education, and how do we bring those two pieces together? Because as you've mentioned, you're right, it is complicated. Not one person always falls into those two hats.
And I know in the past, as Mr. Nixon also mentioned, we've had trouble sort of finding that unicorn person who is able to do both. Do you anticipate that this is going to open up opportunities in the future once we implement these positions for hiring?
Yeah, I think that we, as this pandemic has taught us, right, technology, we already knew this, and I think we've, made great strides with technology, but more and more we see that as, I remember us talking 6 or 7 years ago about it being almost like a utility that we pay, right? You need to turn the lights on to run the buildings. You need to, so in this past year in particular, it's just such a foundation of what we do to have this technology. We just really need support for both the teaching and learning piece and the backbone and infrastructure. And like Judy said, we run it on a very tight skeleton crew, and it's really important that we have what the teachers need so that then we can make sure the students have what they need. So.
Well, thank you for rethinking this and trying to find a way to make this work to really benefit us to the most advantage. I appreciate that.
Thanks. Great team effort.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellen Emma. Ms. Bolognese. You're still muted. There.
Took me a little while. Thank you very much for the descriptions and for taking the time to split up these positions. I think that's very helpful. And I guess I had more questions around the coordinator of digital learning and innovation. But I guess one item was, is there anything that we might add in here that we would add in this description that would capture, that we would add in this description in the era of COVID and remote learning? I think Ms. Kirby just alluded to that, that this year, more than any other year, we've really seen a rise of our remote learning, and how best can we meet that challenge going forward. So that was one item. And then just the second, this is more small or smaller, excuse me. I was wondering if there was, I was a little confused as I was reading through all the responsibilities because there were just so many different aspects of it. And I guess I was just wondering maybe if they're grouped by like larger responsibilities, and then larger responsibilities, so that a person who's reading through this or looking at it online can capture the major ideas and then see what the tasks are underneath each larger responsibility.
Take another look at it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It is a long, lengthy list, and yeah, putting them into categories.
Can I add to that point, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Nixon.
So in the past, when we have developed new job descriptions, we've made similar observations where it's sort of easy to take all the stuff we think is important and you put it down, and sometimes it's really lengthy and it's all good stuff, but it can be maybe a little more persuasive to a candidate if we can drill it down a little bit. And the observation I wanted to make that is in one job description, we have minimum qualifications, and then we have essential duties and responsibilities, and there are 20. And on another job description, we have qualifications and responsibilities, but we have no essential duties. The point is the phraseology is a little bit different. And I wonder if we can actually kind of merge the two to pick up on Karen's point that maybe you've got qualifications and then think about essential duties for both roles that are really essential, that probably shouldn't be more than 4 or 5 bullets. And then, you could certainly list responsibilities. And I would suggest, like on page 11 of our packet, if the responsibility is to collaborate with the administrator of IT, and I feel like if leadership team members aren't collaborating, they need to straighten themselves out, or they don't need to be on the team. I mean, there's just sort of fundamental things we expect of folks. So to Karen's point, I would really try to drill down and pull out the things that are really sort of essential, that make the job unique, because I think we should all be collaborating, with one another. I think shorter is better to the extent we can pull it off.
I agree, Chris, and I would just push back a little bit by just saying that the essential duties are just critical, and so that if there ever were an issue, we just want to make sure that our job responsibilities, duties, essential qualities are very clear and are all listed, because we could run into troubles that way. But I agree. I mean, there just seems to be some, it can be redundant. So just to make it more concise, I hear what you're saying.
What I'm saying, Lori, is I like that term, essential duties. I'm just saying it doesn't appear in the job description for digital learning and innovation.
Right. No, you're right. You're spot on.
There's an opportunity to use both to make a distinction between the things that are essential and then the stuff that we just expect you to do. Because in the list of all the things that we do, there's always a few things at the top that are truly essential.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Ms. Bolognese, I believe you had a first question, and I'm racking my brain what your first question was.
She was asking about the COVID times.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I think it speaks to the whole reason that we wanted to capture innovation in the title, because, right now it's COVID. Next year, we could have something else the following year. So the idea that this person is kind of responsible for staying up on all that is new and cutting edge, both in what's happening around us and in the tools that people can use.
Yes, like your watch person. I like that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellen Emma. Any additional questions? Dr. Evans, we would anticipate when you have these ready for us to vote, could be the next meeting. If it doesn't get to then, it would be the following meeting for sure. But we should expect to see this as an action item at our next meeting that it's at.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And thank you for the work on those. Very supportive. With that, I'd like to move on to our next agenda item, which is to vote on proposed superintendent's goals for the 2020-2021 school year. I want to be clear, as I said at the outset of the meeting, we put these and the next agenda item as voting items so that we have that flexibility. But it's also our chance to it's also our discussion as well. So I don't want to have it feel like it should be a quick discussion. So each year we, as a committee, vote on the superintendent's performance goals, which are then by tradition assessed in March, just before the municipal election. So I would like to turn it over to you, Dr. Evans, to talk about the goals that you've proposed here.
Sure, be happy to. So this is an unusual year, as everyone's well aware, and our district goals took longer to develop than is typical, and are somewhat simplified based on recommendations from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to focus on just some indicators of the educator evaluation piece. The typical process for this is when we support a shared understanding of the district goals, then the superintendent goals align with those, but include also a professional practice goal and a student learning goal, which is required about educational evaluation plans. And then district improvement goals, between 1 and 3 district improvement goals, which align with the district goals and improvement plan that you've already approved. I've included some key actions here and suggested that we do a check-in on progress in February. Much like I did with the district goals, I'll flesh out these key actions to be a bit more measurable and specific. And what I was trying to do was propose goals that were fairly easy to understand and get behind because they aligned with the district goals, and recognize that in a pandemic, what we're trying to do is respond to the needs of our students in a period of uncertainty. And so it's always difficult to say in November or December what you're hoping to accomplish for the rest of the year when you have no idea what the rest of the year is going to look like. And so these are unusual times. I'd also say that while personal growth is always important to me, and I'm always looking for feedback, I hope that everybody recognizes that all of us are stretched really thin, and that especially school committee has many conflicting responsibilities in the next few months. And so while I always welcome feedback, the formal process of educator evaluation is something that we have really streamlined for all educators in the district this year, and I'd hope that you would give me the same consideration in terms of my goals. So first professional practice goal is around having a strong and connected district leadership team. We have several new members of our team. We may be hiring additional members. I need to support that process and support the growth and integration into the district of new members of the team. And so I'd like that to be a professional practice goal. It's something that I've been able to do, I think, effectively in my 6 years here, and want to be sure that we continue to do that for this year. The student learning goal is really around developing and executing plans, procedures, and operational systems to support both teachers and students as they negotiate the hybrid and remote programs. What that looks like is going to look different over the course of the year. It will require listening, surveying, checking in on staff members and teachers and students, and being responsive to their needs, and trying to balance many conflicting demands and desires and perspectives. The district improvement goals, you're all well aware of. Looking at meeting the health and safety requirements and public health protocols associated with COVID is one goal. Making sure that we continue to have an environment where our students are challenged, motivated, engaged, and finally, continuing to support the Lynch Building Project, which is not necessarily a district goal, but one where Ellen and I will continue to play a big role, as well as Zena as part of the building committee in EFPBC. So those are the goals that I have proposed. I'm certainly open to feedback. And I understand that the process is not the typical process this year, where it's a bit more streamlined, but certainly welcome any feedback on these. And if you are not comfortable voting on them tonight, you can certainly talk to me individually and I can do another draft. In the end, I think what we're trying to accomplish is to be sure that what I have as priorities are the same as your priorities, and that we are all flexible and responsive as we continue to encounter new situations and new challenges every day with this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evans. Before I open it up to general questions, I have two questions that I think will be sort of helpful for the conversation. The first is if you have thoughts on the timing of the superintendent evaluation as it pertains to the school year. As I mentioned in the opening, it's typically done prior to the municipal election. I just was wondering if you have any thoughts on that, just something that might be help kick it off. And then the second question, and then I'll open, after you address those, I'll open it up. If after these goals, whatever goals are approved, is that when you would then recommend focus indicators as specified on the evaluation? So those sort of two questions, sort of general questions of your thoughts.
Sure. So one of the things that long-term I think the school committee needs to consider is whether the current evaluation process for the superintendent position is effective. So in general, I have had my goals approved, given a mid-year update in January, And then by early March, the evaluation process is complete so that the current chair can write the evaluation, because our chair tends to change every year around election for the town election. This isn't the typical timeline that most districts are using. And in fact, many superintendents didn't have their final evaluations until the summer. We are supposed to send the indicators of proficient or needs improvement or exemplary on each of the standards to the DESE by the end of June. So the process should be completed by the end of June in theory. In terms of the process for this, there's not a lot of time between now and March when you'll be writing my evaluation for me to demonstrate achievement of these, and much of the work I do will be well after the evaluation has been completed. You know, at this point in my career, this is my 13th year as superintendent, I think I would advocate that we prioritize much as we did with some of the teachers in terms of the evaluation instrument. And in most cases, most of our teachers will receive proficient ratings and only get feedback on certain focus indicators, except for people who are new to the profession, who are non-professional status. Because what we're trying to do is minimize stress on the process, minimize stress on the evaluators, recognize that many people will be observed doing something they've never done before, which is remote instruction. No superintendent has ever led a district through a pandemic in my lifetime. So I think it's open to interpretation how well we've done with that. And it will not be known until actually we're through it and on the other side. And so my advice would be to focus on the feedback and coaching portion of this, which is to give me direct feedback, and much less on the formal process. And not that I, you know, am saying just check a box and write proficient with no comments, but I think we're all under enough stress that focusing on my evaluation as a primary focus for the school committee is probably not the best use of your time.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. So I appreciate that. I just want to kick it off a little bit. And I would ask the committee if they would like to add have any questions or comments about the superintendent's proposed goals. Ms. Marchant.
Thank you, Brian. I first of all want to say that I appreciate that these goals match perfectly with our district goals, which we've approved. So I don't really think that there's any controversy around the goals themselves. You mentioned process a few minutes ago, and I just hope that we give you the same courtesy we're giving the other professionals in our district, meaning that nobody's done this before. Neither have you. I don't think we've ever had a pandemic where you've had to lead a district. And so this is a very unique time, and everybody had a very steep learning curve. And so in law, we divide process from substance. And I hope that we focus on the substance of these goals and the substance of your work. And so I think these are ready to go. And so I would urge the committee not to get hung up on some of the timing that we've had to just adjust for, and then to just move forward so we as a district can continue to measure ourselves along the same lines. Because what else would we look at? You have teachers, you're looking at students, you're looking at health, you're looking at academic innovation. And so this is what we've been talking about this whole time, and the equity walks, all of that. And of course, Lynch, school building. And so I'm happy to see these goals, and I'm excited to see where we end up in June in terms of where our students feel that they are, because we've seen how positively the students themselves have responded to this year, with some, of course, I always have to create that little nuance of people aren't all doing well, but for the position we find ourselves in, I'm prepared to vote for these goals and to kind of get you going to continue the process. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Marchant. Additional questions from the committee? Mr. Nixon.
So I agree with some things that Ms. Marchant just said, but I also have a different point of view. And perhaps I should have pressed a little harder on this, but going back to our meeting, I think it was back in October when we first discussed the district goals process. Some may recall I shared with the committee that MASC has clarified that although many districts, and this has been our practice, frankly, for many years, is to develop district goals and to sort of let those substantially inform the superintendent goals. There's nothing wrong with that. As I said, we've done that for many years. It's not necessarily required. One doesn't have to inform the other so directly. It's okay for districts to make an effort to just sort of separate the two, which kind of made sense to me because one is a large organization with nearly 5,000 students. The other is a person with 13 years experience in the role. So one is, one's a person and one's a big organization. And so they're not one and the same. So I do agree completely with something Ms. Marchant said, which is not to get sort of hung up in the process. And as you guys know, I'm a big process guy, but I agree with everything she just said. I don't want to sort of muck up the works unnecessarily. But having said that, I've been reflecting a lot on how our last evaluation cycle ended, and we all remember we talked candidly at that public meeting about it. We I thought agreed as a committee that we would schedule like a lessons learned workshop, some reflective self-assessment of that process. That didn't happen. That's not Dr. Evans's fault. We're the school committee, not Dr. Evans. There happened to be a global pandemic at the time. So there are many things that sort of fall to the wayside as that became more and more difficult. Scheduling that workshop to me is a bit like talking about that facilities workshop that Ms. Marchant suggested, which I think is a great idea, but we've been talking about it for like a year and a half or more, and it still hasn't happened. So the reason why that lessons learned, that self-assessment is so important is that the superintendent evaluation cycle is a 5-step cycle. That self-assessment is actually step 1. And that's where it starts, and that's really where it ends. MASC likes to say you can think of it as a recap of the work that's been done and the progress that's been made during the previous evaluation cycle. And it asks a basic question: what's been accomplished in the past year and what work needs to be done? And in fact, step 2 is the development of the superintendent goals concurrently with the focus indicators. And you all will remember last year, the indicators came later, and they're actually both really important. I feel like it is important for us to press pause, not because anything's objectionable in any of the goals that Dr. Evans shared with us tonight, but because I think that getting back to step 1, having that discussion, not only could be, but will be really meaningful for us, especially in this crazy year. And I'm really appreciative of the comments Dr. Evans just made about, timing, the sequence of our evaluation, which is historically, we've tried to wrap it up before the municipal election. This is maybe a year where we should question whether or not that even makes sense, because every year, and I've been on this committee now for like 13 years, without exception, every year it feels rushed, some more than others, but it does tend to feel rushed. I would suggest, and I don't want to get too far ahead in my skis tonight, but if we could press pause and find a way to have that reflective self-assessment, I think we can ask the question about what's been accomplished, where have we been successful, what needs to be done. I think those are great questions to ask, but specifically through the lens of the 4 standards. So what specifically has been really successful in instructional leadership, in management and operations, and in family and community engagement, in professional culture, and what remains to be done. And I think if we frame sort of the conversation in that way, I think it's a great opportunity to, once more, reflect on the many successes of Dr. Evans and also identify those areas where we feel there's an opportunity for growth or attention. And I think if we start the conversation that way, I think it also makes it easier for us to have the conversation with Dr. Evans around the focus indicators. And there are many. There are 4 standards and there's 20 indicators. And no school committee uses all 20 indicators. They're different for a reason. And so I'd like to find a way for us to have a conversation where we reach an agreement with the superintendent, not only on the goals, but on the indicators. I see them very much intertwined. And I think if we kick it off with that meaningful conversation, I think we'll have an easier time getting there. Having said all that, I don't think there's time to do that if we're looking to wrap up an evaluation before the March election, because that would be the most rushed cycle of any that I've been a part of. But I do think this is the year to really question whether we might change the scheduling of this completely. And it sounds like the superintendent is open to that as well. I've never really seriously considered that, and I've only recently learned other districts have. So my eyes have been open to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Do other committee members have questions or comments?
I would just echo both what Ms. Marchant and Mr. Nixon said. So I think that Dr. Evans' goals are well tied to where we are going for the district. But something Dr. Evans actually said is what stuck with me the most, which is that for the educators this year, the process has been streamlined and they have boiled it down to just a couple key focus indicators, even for the teachers. I'm curious to know, Dr. Evans, was that something we decided to do as a district? Was that at the direction of DESE?
You might remember, and Lori and Jen can jump in on this one as well, because they're the ones who have worked with the evaluation subcommittee to determine, how are we going to adjust the way we give teachers coaching and feedback, which is really what the purpose of evaluation is in a pandemic year. So last year, the evaluation process was immensely shifted due to the pandemic, where we tried to streamline the process. And a similar effort was made this year, mainly for professional status teachers who are going to get less feedback probably than they normally would, because so much of their work is not observable in a pandemic because it's sometimes more difficult to get into their Zoom sessions for some people. Some people have had to completely change their practice and they're learning from scratch, and they're getting coached just on those things that they most need in order to be effective with students. So Jen and Lori, can you shine any light on how the evaluation process looks different from teachers and how we settled on the focus indicators for those teachers?
Sure. I think Lori can talk to a lot of the specifics. And I think what we tried to do as a group, we do have per contract, like a standing subcommittee that we meet every year, talk about timelines, any tweaks and adjustments that we need to make. And that's represented. We have administrators and teachers and usually a director that works on that. But I think our big focus this year has been, instead of thinking about evaluation as the end, kind of the summative evaluation, thinking about how we just talk about practices along the way. So I would say that's the big shift. And the focus is on more observations and more kind of in that moment feedback. So instead of writing up an observation where you might make recommendations to someone on their practice, before you do that you have a conversation. So that you can ask questions, get clarification, and the teacher can share what's happening. It's, frankly, a mindset and a movement we've been trying to keep shifting towards for a while, and the pandemic really provided an opportunity to do that. As Judy said, a lot of people are, we laugh, it's like we're all first year again at everything.
Right.
And so it's given us this opportunity now to say it should be a comfortable process where we're just all constantly learning and giving feedback. It's not even always that your evaluator is somebody who's more, who's a better judge of something. In the end, they are, with all the different times that they've seen. But in that moment, what we're always asking for is kind of just that objective lens. When you're in the act of teaching, you can't see everything, and you certainly can't see yourself. So it's just that opportunity for that objective viewpoint and that conversation and that growth. And we're hoping that it happens regularly and immediately, and we've increased the observations to increase that part rather than thinking about the end goal of the evaluation as kind of being the it. But I'm sure Lori has more she can definitely fill in.
So the only thing I would add to that is really making the educator the driver in this process. As Jen said, we want to make it collaborative and we want to make it more of a coach, if you will, because we are, all in this together. It's all of us together with our different perspectives, our different expertise that really make the difference for our student. So this year, the educators have the opportunity to invite the evaluators, their supervisors, into their classrooms. And prior to that, they're thinking about what it is they want them to come in. And as Jen said, and have that bird's eye view of, this is what I'm working on, this is what I'm celebrating, or this is where I just need a bit of advice. So we're excited at the process, but again, we want to just make sure you have a very clear picture. It's messy. It's messy because we have many staff that have very good intentions of being there, teaching remotely or in their classrooms, and for many different reasons, they're unable to do so. So there is certainly, we hope and wish it wouldn't be as frustrating and as anxiety provoking, because truly there is never a thing of perfection in teaching. It's an art, it's a craft, and it's a science, and it's messy. And that's how we get better. So we're really working together, and evaluators are feeling stressed because they're worried about meeting deadlines, and educators are stressed because that. So again, this is a great forum to have this conversation so that we all understand, one, we're in it together and we hear each other. And it's so important that people speak up and share where they are, what they need, so that, again, we can work together to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Kirby. Dr. Ellenema. Ms. Bergstrom, do you have a follow-up or?
Well, I just wanted, so I'm thinking about that and how that applies to the process that we're doing here, because the one thing I do notice missing from this are those key focus indicators that we have agreed on that are tied to specific things. And I almost wonder, listening to Dr. Ellenema and Dr. Kirby, if...
oh, thank you, Michelle, but I'm not. But thank you. I'm going to change my name. Thank you.
If we want to instead, maybe, and listening, I'm thinking through this as I'm listening to them and through the collaborative process, maybe February is too long. Maybe we just do a quick goal update once a month as we go along, or maybe we could pick a specific goal to update once a month as we go along, so that we don't feel like there's so long between what we're going to evaluate on and what we have in front of us. So back to Mr. Nixon's point, perhaps we do need a short meeting, a short workshop to discuss it and the process for this year.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. Ms. Marchant, and then Ms. Bolognese afterwards.
Oh, thank you. I could have waited, but I just wanted to follow up on what school committee members have said. First of all, we're not a very quiet committee. We're pretty vocal. And I feel like every meeting we are giving feedback on goals and accomplishments. And so it's not something that we haven't been doing from day one, especially as the burden was put on us by the state to decide on the model. We've been evaluating it every day. And through that, we're evaluating Dr. Evans and her leadership. And so 2 things I want to say. I think, I'm not sure if it was Dr. Ellenema or soon to be someday Dr. Kirby. Ms. Kirby was saying that they're really wanting the teachers to be the drivers. And so I think it's incumbent on us as school committee members to allow Dr. Evans to be the driver of these goals and the evaluation process, because she is the expert in the room on this. And I believe strongly that we can do both what you're suggesting on that short workshop, as well as affirming the goals today, because it is just another way for us to show the public that we support our superintendent, we support what's happening in our schools. It's always going to be a process. It's always going to be tweaked and improved and assessed. And so, yes, that's part of it. But I really think that these goals, because they are so well thought out and they are in line with the district goals, and those are goals we supported, that I think it's a good reflection on how we are supportive of our district in general and our staff, our leadership team. So I would hope that we can actually move forward with these goals at the same time that we set up this workshop.
Thank you, Ms. Marchant. My apologies, Ms. Bolognese.
Still muted. Perfect. I keep missing the button. Let me just see. I guess just starting with timing, since that was one of the first questions that had come up. I think that's very interesting what Mr. Nixon was saying, that every year it's been a rush in 13 years of having served on school committee. I like the idea of moving the evaluation timeframe back into June, as opposed to tying it to our election and committee reorganization. So I personally would support the idea of moving the evaluation back into June, as opposed to running it in March, which I feel as if that's a very truncated timeline that we would be forcing. And as Dr. Evans was saying, it leaves 3 months of the school year when she's still working really hard to get things accomplished. With that said, I also think that the focus indicators are an important part of this process. And then just with respect to the process, I do think that it's important. I do think that the action steps that Dr. Evans has laid out in her document do tie in nicely with the district goals. I would like to see, and I appreciate that you had said that you'll be adding in the element of how it's measured along the way, because that was something that I was curious about. And I guess just with respect to process, I do think it is helpful to have, especially in this year, to have a conversation about how what we've learned, or an element of self-reflection over the course of the year, and then just being able to open that discussion about that can help us to really inform how we want to move forward with the district and the district goals and the superintendent goals. So.
Thank you, Ms. Bolognese. So I'm hearing a couple of different thoughts from people. So I'll tell you, I sort of opened with my 2 questions, and I think they remain the 2 questions that I think concern me the most, which is the timing of this, timing of the eventual superintendent evaluation, and then the timing of selection of and the collaboration on selection of focus indicators, which was one of the crucial parts of eventually doing the superintendent evaluation. So we do have this as an action item. I guess I can say where I'm coming from, which would be, I would be comfortable voting to approve these superintendent goals with the following caveats: that you would come back to us for approval of the focus indicators, collaboratively working on those. And I would further add that I agree with Mr. Nixon, Ms. Bergstrom, and Ms. Bolognese, that having sort of a lessons learned, sort of a step one in that evaluation process is important. But at the same time, it's December 15th right now. Realistically, the soonest that could happen would be the end of December, realistically, probably more like early January. And I know that we have a lot of things that we want to get done. I don't want that to hold up this. So obviously, I will go the direction the committee would like to go. But I would, after everybody has had a chance to adequately say whatever they'd like, I would certainly welcome a motion to approve these performance goals with whatever caveats we want to have, which could be that we will collaboratively work on the focus indicators between now and June, that we will have a workshop. I just don't want perfection to be the enemy of a job well done, and we do need to approve this at some point. So I feel like we can sort of, I think we can meet everything we all want somehow and move the ship forward. So unless if there are additional questions or comments or discussion, I'm certainly open to that. And then I would, because it's an action item, I will certainly accept a motion. And if there's a motion and a second, I will call it for a vote. Mr. Nixon.
Yeah, so thank you. I suppose I have an observation. I really agree with something Ms. Marchant said a few minutes ago, which is we're a pretty vocal committee, and I'm not sure exactly what she meant by that, but I'll tell you how I interpreted it. I mean, we're not shy. When we feel we need to communicate with the superintendent, we do, right? And that's probably what you meant. So even if there was no Massachusetts formal superintendent evaluation process, this school committee would be letting Dr. Evans know what we think of how she's doing on a pretty regular basis. And so that's kind of the inescapable truth. And so that's where I agree with Ms. Marchant 100%. However, because this is a process that's required and it's regulated through DESE, and it is, I think, depending on certain committees year to year, it can be an uncomfortable process, especially when, let's say, you've got turnover on a school committee. New school committee members, when they encounter some process for the very first time, your first question is, well, how did this work last year? You know, you don't really want to reinvent the wheel. So a common question is, well, how should this be done? Which is what I think is so interesting about this idea of us being open to really just extending out the schedule, taking advantage of the crazy year we're having. There is, I want to say sort of two things. In my opinion, there is value in us pressing pause, not that there's anything wrong with the goals that Dr. Evans has proposed tonight, but because it represents half of step 2 and only half of step 2, and we haven't had step 1. If we have that conversation in step 1, we may have a better understanding. And Ms. Marchant's right. They certainly track with the district goals we're all familiar with. The committee with Dr. Evans may feel that there's a goal that's in the packet tonight that maybe can go away either entirely because it is that crazy year. And as Dr. Kirby was saying, we're trying to streamline. So maybe we go back to step 1 and we wind up in actually a better place than what we have tonight. I'm not saying it's flawed. So that's what I feel like about just this process right now. I'm just a believer in kind of starting in the starting blocks as opposed to some yards down the track. But I would just say as the gray-haired school committee member tonight, there's another value to this, is that any time a school committee really deliberately takes on an important repetitive process like a superintendent evaluation or like our budget development process with the superintendent, we kind of set some precedent for future school committees. And we've all said before, no school committee can tie the hands of a future school committee. That's not what it's about, but it's about trying to do what we've done in the past a little bit better. And if we're successful in doing it better, then the next school committee has the chance to sort of build on that. So as difficult as this year has been for everyone, our administrators mostly tonight with us, I feel like this is an opportunity, and I feel like we should pause, not toss anything in the trash, just pause, have the reflective step 1 conversation, see where it takes us. And as we do that, it seems to me there's some real openness on the part of the committee and the superintendent towards pushing out a deliverable towards June. That's a great opportunity to talk about how does that work, and how if there should be turnover on a school committee after March 31st, what role do former school committee members play in the process? What role do new school committee members play in the process, which I guess other districts have tackled. And I think there's a really smart way to go about having those conversations. So that's what I wanted to get off my chest, is it's not just about the here and now in this cycle, but it's the progress we can make towards making it better for future school committees as well.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Ms. Bergstrom, and then Ms. Marchand.
A clarifying question, Mr. Nixon?
Mr. Nixon. Ms. Bergstrom.
Yes, it's Mr. Nixon, not Doctor.
I was going to say Dr. Bergstrom. What do you see as the value or the difference between approving or not approving them tonight, the goals tonight? What difference do you see it making for this committee and for Dr. Evans in taking this pause if we don't expect the goals to shift dramatically?
So as sure, thank you. We might actually find that it's a shorter list. There may be a goal that we just feel doesn't need to be a goal because it's already something that Dr. Evans is hitting out of the park and she's doing it every day in her sleep. There may be a shorter list of things that we might mutually agree she could focus on. But I also think that the 20 indicators that sort of support the 4 standards are pretty interesting because they might actually inform kind of how one, I want to say wordsmiths, but it's not even quite that grainy. One can have a general goal, but an understanding of the focus indicators might help articulate the goal maybe similarly, but still differently in some important way. This was one of the struggles about last year, right? Was that the goals weren't really developed with the indicators. You have to evaluate the 4 standards with the indicators. And in fact, I think in standard number 3, we didn't have any indicators until we were already halfway down the process, until a school committee member pointed it out and asked, well, which one are we supposed to be using? So, that was just an oversight in the process. But focus indicators, to me, and I don't want to speak for other committee members, but for me, focus indicators are really an important way not only to think about evaluating those 4 standards, but because they're so important, I think they can actually help us as we think about and articulate the goals. I don't think of the focus indicators as an afterthought. I think of it as an ingredient, if you will, with the 4 standards. I'm answering that in a very clumsy way. I think the end result might be just a little more meaningful, better understood, and perhaps even streamlined a little bit. But I don't know until we go through the process, to be perfectly honest with you.
Because as chair last year, I did find the process at the end where the focus indicators came in at the end as messy and not helpful to the superintendent or the school committee members that were trying to evaluate the superintendent effectively at that time. So I appreciate that portion of the idea of your comments, that those might be important to include from the beginning and to understand specifically what they are. And to other people's point about this year being messy and the process being messy, I think it might be easier to streamline those down now rather than try to place 10 or 15 of them in at the end.
I agree with you, and the fewer indicators, the better. The point is there's 20 to sort of work from, right? And so you can have a conversation about what's really important. The last thing I would say, Dr. Vernalia, is that I don't make these comments as a criticism of anyone individually. We own this process as a school committee. I could have caught some things earlier in last cycle had I been paying more attention to some elements. And so I was as frustrated with myself as I was with the overall process at certain points. And I wondered, particularly for me, having been through it so many years, internalizing, like, how did I miss this? And so that's why I sort of feel like maybe this is a moment to take a breath and really be deliberate about when I say doing it the right way, what I mean is doing it a little bit differently. Let's take advantage of the openness towards a difference in schedule and just really be methodical about following this as a 5-step process, and just help sort of lay some crumbs, if you will, for school committees of the future.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Ms. Marchant, are you preparing to make a motion?
Well, I need to say a couple of things, and then yes, I will be making a motion.
So may I allow you to speak first, and then I saw Ms. Bolognese had her hand raised, and then I'll come back to any motion after everybody's had a chance. So you may go first, however, please.
Thank you. I feel that we have always evaluated Dr. Evans thoroughly, and that these focus indicators and all of these categorized nuances are technicalities, and I tend to think of the big picture. And what I'm afraid of is that we're not giving the same courtesy to Dr. Evans, the district leader, as we are her staff, the teachers. And so it feels, I know that Mr. Nixon said it isn't, but it kind of feels like we're punishing Dr. Evans for us not having done the homework of ensuring that focus indicators were thought of earlier. It is December, mid-December. And so I want to push back that this is an odd year, not an odd year in the way that now we want to get into the deep discussions. This is an odd year with such limited time. The woman has not had a day off since March. And so this is an odd year not to give things too much, I don't know what the words are. It's so like, it's like we're splitting hairs. That's the phrase. This is a year where we tell Dr. Evans how things are going as we go. Our kids are impacted on a daily basis. And for us to play with indicators and all of these categories is not serving the greater purpose of showing our district leader that the goals she set are exactly what we've asked for. And she has experience with the focus indicators. I guarantee you that all of her goals will fit under focus indicators. It's not something that is made to be a difficult puzzle. Focus indicators are saying, here are the options. And so we have options to work with. And so I really want to emphasize that for me, the process is not the point today. The delving deeper when a person has achieved and exceeded expectations repeatedly, going into her 13th year as superintendent, for us to tell her, no, we're wanting to go back to the table and we're going to drag this out. I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's setting the right tone for our district staff, for our families, for our community members, for our students. And so I really hope that this is something that we can get done today to say yes to, and then in the future, work on a different process for evaluations, because that's what the committee members want to do. And so I wish we had set this tone earlier so that she had the tools to work with sooner. But at this point, we've got to give the goals the chance to be accomplished. And by dragging this out further, we're not giving her the chance to move forward under these specific topics, because she's doing the job. Day in and day out, she's meeting and exceeding these goals. And so for us to then belabor this point and say, no, we want to work out a process, I don't think this is the right time in a pandemic for us to create more work for her, because she's doing this work already.
Thank you, Ms. Marchant. Ms. Bolognese, the two of you always raise your hands at exactly the same time.
I guess I just wanted to get back to what you were saying, Mr. Vernalia, about or I guess you were saying move forward with the goals, but also work collaboratively on the focus indicators and possibly a workshop to continue this discussion. And I guess just also connecting it back to what Dr. Ellen Emma and what Ms. Kirby were discussing about with the educators, it has been a collaborative process, and I would repeat process. But along the way, the educators and the evaluators have, as Dr. Ellen Emma was saying, have identified, are there any tweaks, are there any practices along the way? And then they have given their feedback in the moment. So I guess I was just wondering, and I would just say from my personal experience from working through the evaluation last year or earlier this year for our first time, I did find it rather confusing. Yes, just all the different steps in the focal indicators and everything. So I guess I am just wondering, Mr. Vernalia, when you were talking about workshops, I guess what is the timeline that we would be looking at? Because I do agree, it is December, but if we do push our evaluation date out to June, I think we do have more time, but I guess I would like to see a timeline. By when do we think we could get this done? Because I do think time is important.
So I'll address your question, starting by saying that I'm a chemical engineer, and for me, process is the product. If you don't have a process, you can't trust the product. At the same time, you also have to be practical and look at what the year you're in and the conditions you're in, and sometimes you have to sometimes you have to make adjustments. So what I'm proposing is actually an adjustment to the process, which would be that we approve these goals with 2 caveats, really 3 caveats. One be that we meet, I would propose, before the first 2 weeks of January have been completed, to have a workshop. During that workshop, we could go over collaboratively what we think those focus indicators would be, and approve those focus indicators. If the first 2 weeks don't work, maybe I'd say the first 3 weeks. I don't want us to tie us in. We also are doing budgets, so that would be sort of 2 aspects, 2 caveats. One would be to approve these focus indicators at a later date. Second would be to have this meeting where we workshop, where we work on this, and where we sort of do some of the step 1 work, even though we've already approved the goals. We could always change the goals with collaboratively if we think there's something that needs to be changed. And then the third part of it would be to the caveat that the goals are going to be assessed in June as opposed to March. If we're assessing them in March, I see nothing other than to approve them and move on right now, because otherwise we're talking about assessing goals 2 months after we approve them if we wait till January. So with those 3 caveats, or addendums to any motion, I think we can be comfortable giving Dr. Evans a direction to move forward. I will commit to having a workshop outside of our regularly scheduled meetings sometime in January, and commit to approving the goals, assessing the goals and doing a performance evaluation in June. So that was what I was proposing, and I was a little cumbersome in what I said earlier.
Can I ask a question of Dr. Evans?
Yes, Mr. Nixon.
So Dr. Evans, if we were to move on what the chair is suggesting tonight, if we approve the goals, but with the caveats that have been outlined, we haven't talked about, you've got some key actions that you've also listed in your grid. And it seems to me, if we have a conversation around the focus indicators and there's some, very quickly, we sort of coalesce around some that seem really meaningful. Is it fair to say you might, how tied are you to some of the actions that you've provided in your plan? Are you open to making some changes there if after our workshop that Mr. Vernalia has described, you feel like there's some other actions that might sort of be more essential in evaluating against certain goals? You're on, I think you're still on mute. So I'm asking about how tied are you to the actions as opposed to the goals?
Sure. So, so what I would say is, in general, for the educator evaluation process, which is the same for teachers, administrators, and superintendents, you are required to have a professional practice goal and a student learning goal, and then superintendents in addition are expected to have district improvement goals. And so what those look like, what level of detail is required, whether or not there are key actions, measurable outcomes, timelines, how detailed that is really up to the individual and up to the evaluator. You want the evaluator to know, to have good, concrete evidence that the goal has been achieved. The focus indicators are not necessarily all directly connected to individual goals. Each of the standards is something that is expected. You're expected to be proficient in all of the standards, but in any given year, you might focus on one standard or two standards for feedback. And so whether or not you approve these goals tonight, these are things I'm going to do because they're part of my operation. They're part of the district goals. I need to do them to achieve the district goals. And the main purpose in giving you a draft of my goals is to be sure that there isn't anything that's not on the list that's really important that you wanted me to add or to substitute. And whether or not you give me feedback on all of these goals, you just have to check on the form whether or not I've met the goal or have I made progress toward the goal. And I think goals should be aspirational. I wouldn't expect to meet every goal. I could easily draft goals that I could have already met in 1 month of the year, and you approve them, and then you know they're all met. Sometimes, due to circumstances like pandemics, we achieve very few of our goals because other things come in that are much more important. And so naturally, the process is. If the process of evaluation is for you to determine whether or not I'm proficient, or to give me an indicator of something that I need improvement on, or something that has been exemplary, it's really a reflection not only of my work, but the work of the team, the work of the teachers, the work of the district. And so it's hard to separate the superintendent from the people who do all the work. And so what I would say is it's really important for you, the position of superintendent, and for you as school committee and for subsequent school committee members, to have a clearly defined process that's fair, that's timely, that allows for coaching and feedback, which is what we're all about with evaluation. What I've heard tonight is some movement in that direction, like a recognition that the instrument that the state has developed for you to evaluate the superintendent is cumbersome and not easy to understand, especially for new members. That some of the indicators aren't as clear, and that your interpretation of some of those indicators and rubrics may be different. And so I think the suggestion that you go through the evaluation instrument early in the year so that everyone has a shared understanding of what the document is asking for, I think that's really important. But the most important piece is for you to give me feedback on an ongoing basis so we can keep the district moving in the right direction. And whether or not in the end I'm proficient or need improvement or exemplary is really sometimes just an accident of the circumstances of the year. And in a pandemic year, it could be there are things out of my control, or things that we made mistakes in doing that we didn't address that we should have, or we might just be so happy to get through the end of the year and have all the kids be in a pretty good place that we're all singing the happy dance. And so it really is a very unusual year. So I agree that you need to have a more clearly defined process for the school committee and a very clear understanding of what the rubric looks like and what the indicators are, and an agreement on what those focus indicators should be. So if you vote to support these tonight, then we can move on and then have the workshop and go through the rubric and make sure we select the indicators that we think are most important. But 3 months from now, who knows what's going to happen? We could add 3 goals that are super important that we have to achieve by the end of the year. And I'm totally open to that, and I've always been. So if we're going to model for the teachers that this is about honest conversation about what's going well and what's not going well, I think you give me feedback on that almost every meeting. And so I always try to be reflective after every school committee meeting about the feedback that I'm getting from school committee members, from parents, from the educators in the district. And so there are lots of pieces of this that we can improve the process, but we just have to keep our eye on the big picture, which is how can we just get through the next 6 months and be in one piece in June and make sure that you've got a process in place that works well in subsequent years. when things are more normal.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Again, as it's an action item, I would accept a motion if someone is so inclined. It would need to be seconded, and then I would call a vote.
Okay. I move to approve the superintendent's goals for 2020 to 2021 as presented, with the request that the chair work on the logistics of planning for the workshop that he brought up.
I would ask if there's a second on that motion.
Ask a question.
You may. The motion is not yet seconded, but there's a question.
Should the motion also include the timeline of the evaluation process if we're thinking of moving it back to June? Because or is that part of something or is that coming out of the workshop? I just didn't understand that.
Ms. Marchant, what's your intent behind your motion?
My intent was for the logistics to start with Brian and in terms of the agenda for the workshop, and then for us to reflect on how quick the timeline is and to think about, because there are some issues with pushing it into June, but it requires a longer conversation that I would hope we could have in the workshop.
So the motion has been made. Is there a second? The chair will second that motion.
I was going to say I would second it.
The chair retracts his second of the motion and accepts Ms. Bolognese's motion. So we have a motion moved and seconded.
Discuss, Mr. Vinalia?
Absolutely. Ms. Bergstrom.
Brian, I wrote down what you had stated, which was closer to, I think, where I feel like the majority of the committee was, which was that we would accept the goals with the agreement that we would meet within January to review the focus indicators and have a workshop around the process of the superintendent evaluation, and that we would move the superintendent's evaluation to June of 2020.
If you would be interested in moving to amend the motion to represent that, I would happily accept that motion.
I would amend the motion to that.
Okay.
I'll second that motion to amend.
Okay, so I'd like to summarize the motion to amend is to kind of complicated. The motion to amend, the original motion, is to add timing of the workshop being in the first 2 weeks or so of January. I think you said the month of January is what you just said in your, and that we'll work out those focus indicators and to move the evaluation to June. That was the substance of the motion to amend the original motion. Is there any discussion on the motion to amend?
Just want to make an important clarification. I like the motion to amend that it's June, but it's not yet that specific. So, we can perhaps in our workshop talk about, is it the first Tuesday in June? Is it the second Tuesday in June? For obvious reasons, because so many of our, contracts and extensions happen on June 30th. So those are weeds we can get into later. And I would also just clarify that I see the discussion around focus indicators as a collaborative one with Dr. Evans. It's not us saying these are going to be your focus indicators, but it's a conversation and we reach an agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. So I'm going to call a roll call vote on the motion to amend the main motion. Mr. Nixon.
Aye.
Ms. Marchant.
She may be frozen.
Ms. Marchant.
Am I back?
You are unfrozen now.
Now she's unfrozen.
We are
Okay.
voting on the motion to amend the main motion.
Sure, yeah, yes.
Ms. Bergstrom,
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese. Chair will note that Ms. Bolognese said aye, though she was muted. Chair votes aye. The motion to amend is unanimous, which brings us back to the main motion as described with the amendment. Any discussion on the newly revised motion? Seeing none, roll call vote. Mr. Nixon?
Aye.
Ms. Marchant?
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom?
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Vote is unanimous. Thank you very much. I think this was a very, very useful discussion. I know it took a long time. I'm thrilled that we have approved these goals, and I will work diligently to set up the workshop in January. I will aim for the first 2 weeks of January, but depending on budget and stuff, it'll take place in January as described in the motion. So thank you, Dr. Evans, for listening patiently to us and for presenting these goals that we were able to approve. With that, I would like to move on to the next item, which is the vote to approve transportation agreements. I will just turn it over, I guess, immediately to, excuse me, you're not Dr. Whittemore either. A lot of doctors.
No, no.
Dr. Evans, do you want to kick it off first? Did I see your hand raised?
Yes. So let me just kick this off with a little introduction because it does say transportation agreements. You only have one in front of you tonight. So Ellen will go into a few more details, a high-level overview of this. Here are 2 transportation contracts that need your approval because they are both amended based on the COVID circumstances with the first 10 days of school having no transportation. The SEAM Collaborative is the main vehicle we use for, no pun intended, to transport students with disabilities to out-of-district placements. The SEAM Collaborative manages all the transportation for all of the member districts and for many non-member districts. You appointed me to serve as the district's representative to the collaborative, or a member of that collaborative. I chair the board, and the SEAM Collaborative board had a subcommittee working with an attorney to negotiate with the vendor, which is not the same vendor we use for our regular transportation, to come to some agreement about reduced fees for service based on some of the conditions, the COVID conditions. And so Ellen can summarize some of those for you. Much like you did last spring, in order to maintain a bus fleet, particularly for specialized transportation that often requires special vehicles, it's important to have an honest and supportive relationship with the vendor, but a fair contract. And so this is a negotiated contract that provides for appropriate fees, I believe. The board approved this. Other districts have already paid under the terms of this contract, but I'm looking for the school committee to vote to support it as well, so that we can pay the invoices for the transportation we've had starting in September to our out-of-district placements that SEAM manages for us. And so, Ellen, I don't know if there's anything highlights of the contract that you want to share with the committee. If you vote not to support this, it would mean that we may not be able to use SEAM transportation. And so this is a hard decision in terms of supporting it. But the board decided that all of the districts needed to vote to support this if we're going to move ahead with this MOA, or we'll have to go back to the drawing board and renegotiate it, or there could be litigation that results from not paying bills. So there aren't a lot of good choices in this regard, but I think it was a fair negotiation, and I think it's a fair compromise in terms of payment. So, Ellen, anything else you want to add about that?
The only things I wanted to point out is that the reduced rate for the 10 days that were removed from the school calendar by by the Commonwealth would be at a reduced rate of 50%. And then days that would be remote days where students would not be transported to their schools would be at a 78% of the cost per the existing transportation contract. This agreement would be valid through December 31st, 2020, unless an additional CARES Act employee retention program is extended. And if that is extended, then this agreement would be extended. Otherwise, SEAM is already beginning to have put together a team to negotiate a successor agreement to this memorandum of agreement.
Right, so that's an important qualifier that this just runs September to December. It would extend if the law provides for it. Otherwise, we have to negotiate a separate agreement as a board for the remainder of the school year. What I'd also neglected to say is the second transportation agreement is for our regular student transportation. That's still in negotiation. Zena's the representative to that, and so we'll bring that to you at a later date. But we wanted to wrap up this SEAM collaborative piece today, if possible. So Ellen or I are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Thank you, Ms. Whittemore. Questions from the committee about, since we're specifically talking only about the SEAM contract. Mr. Nixon.
Just watching the molasses pace in Washington around more relief provisions. If, in fact, the employee retention tax credits should be extended, but after December 31st. In other words, if they actually do it, but they do it after the date in this contract, as I read this, it just means we completely renegotiate a contract. That may not be a big deal, but is it either Dr. Evans or Ms. Whittemore, is it your understanding that if the CARES Act is extended before a new contract is executed, we would expect to see similar terms and conditions that are in the one we have tonight?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Additional questions from the committee regarding the contract?
Whenever you're ready, I'm happy to make a motion.
Thank you. Any additional questions? So I do have a question about whether approving this contract will or will not serve as a precedent for the rates that we will feel compelled to pay for our regular transportation, or if they are completely different in all aspects, such that if by approving this, we are not locking ourselves into legal or morally approving something for the regular transportation contract.
So both agreements that were reached last spring were different. This agreement that you have before you tonight for SEAM Collaborative models the percentage that was agreed upon with SEAM last spring, which again, the percentage was different than what had been negotiated with our typical yellow bus transportation company.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question well, thank you. Any additional questions? Seeing none, Ms. Marchant, I will avail you of a motion.
Thanks. I move to approve the transportation agreement as presented in order to complete payments for special education transportation.
Second.
Okay, I'm not sure who seconded that, but it was seconded. Roll call vote. Mr. Nixon?
Aye.
Ms. Marchant?
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom?
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The vote is unanimous. Thank you for your work on getting this contract to us. And would we expect to see a proposed MOA for the regular transportation at our next meeting, or just soon, or do we have a timeline for that?
We are working on that right now.
Okay.
Perhaps
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. With that, we move on to our next agenda item, which is approval of minutes. We have minutes from November 10th and November 17th that are in the packet. And if there are questions or edits, we could accept them now. Otherwise, I could accept a motion to approve one or both of them.
I'm happy to make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Roll call vote. Mr. Nixon?
Aye.
Ms. Marchant?
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom?
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Vote is unanimous, which brings us to the chair report. And it's 9:30 already, but I do have a couple things I wanted to update, seeing as this is our last regularly scheduled meeting of the calendar year of 2020. So thankfully, mercifully, 2020 is almost over. The governor released some recommendations as far as guidelines to keep us safe over the winter vacation. Those include celebrating only with those in your household. If you can, host a virtual celebration and visit your loved ones in their long-term residences, not bringing them to your houses. I say this, sharing this, because we would like to be able to return to school in January, and what the actions that everyone in town takes will impact whether we are able to do that or whether the numbers climb so high that we are unable to reopen in-person schooling in January. So I would encourage everyone to do your part. As Mr. Mahoney said a long time ago in September, feels like a long time ago now, in a little video, he said, do your part. So I'd encourage everyone to do their part. Secondly, I would like to point out that while the year is almost over, very soon into the new year, we will be holding office hours yet again. On January 6th at 7 p.m., we will be holding our next office hours. We have not settled on who will be hosting them. Are there members who have not hosted office hours who would be inclined or interested in participating on the January 6th date at 7 p.m.? I just want to make sure there's an opportunity. I will send out an email as well, but I wanted to just check with you all. And lastly, I was sadly letting the committee and the community know that I have made the difficult decision to step down when I complete my term in March. It has been and continues to be an honor to work with all of you and serve the students of Winchester. However, I need to refocus my energy on my family and my mental health. And as such, I will be continuing through the election in March, and I will work to the best of my ability through then. So I wanted to share that and wish everyone a very happy holiday and vacation. And with that, move on to the superintendent report. Dr. Evans.
Sure. I think I shared enough on my COVID-19 update to keep everybody thinking. And I would just echo your plea. I am pleading with families not to travel during the break. If they do travel, they need to quarantine and submit the appropriate test no earlier than the Monday when they return, because our nurses are not working during the break. And so, but please don't travel unless you absolutely have to keep our students and faculty members and support staff members as illness-free as possible. I would just like to say that working with Brian Vanalia has been an honor, and he's been an incredible leader during this pandemic, and I'm extremely sad to see him leave the committee, but I recognize that he has other obligations pulling at him, and wish him the very best. And I know we'll have time to give him a good send-off, but I couldn't let this opportunity pass to say what an incredible source of calm and humor behind the scenes. You don't always see it in the meetings, and respect and modeling, listening, and making sure everyone is heard that he's been as a chair. I just wanted to make sure that I shared that.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Thank you very much. Future agenda items. The future agenda items listed are not as exhaustive as they sometimes are. I think it's indication that maybe we didn't quite fill it up as it should be. We have Lynch School Building Project update is still on there. We'll expect one hopefully early in the new year, as well as a mascot logo update. And as we have just indicated, we will be having a workshop early in the new year as well. I would encourage you to reach out with additional agenda items. We will obviously be having budget discussions at all of our meetings, probably pretty much moving forward. So please do reach out with additional agenda items. Our next meeting dates are, as indicated, early in January, January 5th. That's a 9:30 a.m. meeting. January 19th, which is both the budget hearing and our regularly meeting to follow. So we will open with the budget hearing, and then when the hearing closes, we'll move on to a regular meeting. And January 26th, which is scheduled to be a budget approval meeting. We've added that additional meeting that I mentioned. We will have need of an executive session next week, which is not on the agenda because it was scheduled. It'll be, executive session will be December 21st at noon. Seeing no additional, Ms. Bolognese, yes.
I just wanted to add in, I think we had mentioned earlier that we would vote the job descriptions.
Yes.
A later date, next meeting.
Job descriptions will need to be in there as well as budget. We expect the job description likely to be at our next meeting, assuming that there is time between now and then to make the revisions that are needed. Thank you. I would happily accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
And a roll call vote. Mr. Nixon?
Aye.
Ms. Marchant?
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom?
Aye.
Ms. Bolognese?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Under 4 hours. Woohoo.
Good night.
Thank you. And thank you, WinCam.
Thank you.